This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never considered myself the paranoid type, but after what happened last month, I question everything and everyone. I'm still trying to process it all, and I figured writing it down might help clear my head. After my divorce was finalized in February, I decided I needed a fresh start. I found this beautiful colonial-style house in Maplewood, not too big, but definitely more space than my old apartment. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement, and this gorgeous kitchen with granite countertops that sold me immediately. The price was right because the previous owners needed to sell quickly, and I thought I'd lucked out. Moving in was exhausting. Between unpacking and my demanding job at the marketing firm, I was drowning. My sister suggested hiring help, which honestly hadn't crossed my mind. Growing up, we never had housekeepers or anything like that. But she made a good point. I was working 50+ hours a week and coming home to boxes and chaos. So I posted an ad online looking for a part-time housekeeper, maybe 2 to 3 days a week. I got a few responses, but Mrs. Phillips stood out immediately. She was in her late 50s, had references, which I checked, and seemed genuinely warm during our interview. She had this grandmotherly vibe that put me at ease. Her rate was reasonable, and she could start right away. It felt like the perfect solution. For the first 2 weeks, everything was amazing. I'd come home to find the house spotless. Dishes done, laundry folded, everything dusted and organized. She even arranged my books alphabetically and color coordinated my closet without me asking. I texted my sister that Mrs. Phillips was a godsend. Then little things started happening. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful from the stress of the new job and house. My car keys weren't where I thought I'd left them. My favorite coffee mug was in a different cabinet. Small stuff that's easy to dismiss. But then I noticed my laptop had been moved. I always leave it at a specific angle on my desk, and one evening it was perfectly centered. When I opened it, the browser history showed searches I hadn't made, local news sites and property records for my neighborhood. That sent a chill down my spine. I started paying closer attention. I began taking photos of how I left rooms before heading to work, then comparing when I returned. That's when I confirmed things were definitely being moved. Not just cleaned, rearranged. My perfume bottles were in different order. The photos on my nightstand were slightly turned. My phone charger, which I always leave plugged in by my bed, was in the living room. One evening I came home early from work with a headache and found Mrs. Phillips in my bedroom. She wasn't cleaning. She was sitting on my bed looking through my photo albums. When she saw me, she didn't even seem embarrassed. She just smiled and said, "You were such a pretty child. You still have the same eyes." I was too stunned to say anything meaningful. She gathered her cleaning supplies and left like nothing weird had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her sitting there, looking through my personal things. The next morning, I noticed strange marks on the hallway wall. Small pencil marks at different heights. When Mrs. Phillips arrived, I pointed them out and asked if she knew what they were. She looked at them, then at me, and said, "You must have done that yourself, dear. I've never seen those before." But I hadn't. I know I hadn't. After she left that day, I did a deeper check of the house and found something that made my stomach drop. In the guest bedroom closet, behind some storage boxes, was a small bag that wasn't mine. Inside were hair ties, a toothbrush, and a change of clothes. all things that would allow someone to stay overnight. There was also a small notebook with details about my schedule written down: when I left for work, when I returned, which nights I went to yoga class. I immediately called my sister, who told me to fire Mrs. Phillips immediately. I agreed, but decided to do it the next day in person. That night, I double-checked all the locks and even pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door before going to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to someone whispering my name. Rebecca. It was faint but clear, coming from the other side of my bedroom door. Rebecca, are you awake? I froze, barely breathing, hoping whoever it was would think I was still asleep. The whispering stopped, and then I heard footsteps moving away down the hall. I was terrified but convinced myself it could have been the house settling or my imagination working overtime. When morning came, I moved the dresser and checked the house. No one was there, and all the doors were still locked. I told myself I must have dreamed it, but deep down, I knew better. Mrs. Phillips was due to arrive at 10 a.m. I rehearsed what I'd say to fire her, trying to stay calm but firm. But 10 a.m. came and went with no sign of her. By 11, I was relieved but confused. She'd never been late before. At 11:30, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Phillips, looking completely normal in her usual cardigan and slacks. She apologized for being late, said she had a doctor's appointment she'd forgotten about. Something about her eyes seemed different, more intense, but her voice was as pleasant as ever. Before I could say anything about terminating her services, she handed me a small gift bag. "Just a little housewarming present I've been meaning to give you," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a framed photo of me as a child, one I'd never seen before. It showed me at around age 8, playing in a park I didn't recognize. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I have my ways," she said, brushing past me into the house. "Some tea would be lovely. I'll just get started on the bathrooms while you put the kettle on." I stood there, frozen, staring at this impossible photograph. I never gave her any photos of me, and this wasn't one from my albums. I don't even know how she could have obtained it. That was it. I wasn't going to wait or be polite anymore. I followed her upstairs and told her directly that I no longer needed her services and she needed to leave immediately. Her face changed. The grandmotherly mask slipped, revealing something cold and angry underneath. "You don't mean that, Rebecca," she said, stepping toward me. "We're just getting to know each other. I've put so much effort into this house, into you." The way she said "into you" made my skin crawl. I backed away, repeating that she needed to leave. She just smiled and said she'd finish the bathrooms first, then we could discuss it. I went downstairs to call the police, but my phone was missing from where I'd left it on the counter. The landline I'd recently had installed gave no dial tone. I looked out the window and saw her car blocking my driveway, making it impossible for me to leave in my own car. I decided to just get out of the house and go to a neighbor's. But when I tried the front door, it wouldn't open. The deadbolt, which I never used during the day, was locked, and my keys were nowhere to be found. I ran to the back door. Same thing. All the windows on the first floor had been locked from the inside, many with chairs or furniture pushed in front of them. She had been systematically trapping me inside my own home. I heard her humming as she came down the stairs. "Looking for these?" she asked, dangling my house and car keys from her finger. "Sit down, Rebecca. We need to talk about our living arrangement." "Our living arrangement?" I repeated, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. "Yes, dear. I've decided this house is perfect for both of us. I've been preparing it for weeks now. That's when I noticed the small marks I'd seen on the walls were actually measurements. For furniture, for frames, for shelves. She'd been planning to move in all along. "The basement is nearly ready for you," she continued, as casual as if discussing the weather. "It's not ideal, but you'll adjust. Everyone does eventually." My blood ran cold. I looked toward the basement door, which was now padlocked from the outside. Had she been preparing a space to keep me prisoner? "You're insane," I said, backing away. "My sister knows I'm here. People will look for me." Mrs. Phillips laughed. "Your sister in Boston? The one you text every few days but rarely call? I've been handling your phone for a week now. She thinks you're fine, just busy with work and settling in." That was true. I had been so busy I'd only been texting my sister, not calling. But how did Mrs. Phillips know about those texts? Had she been reading my messages? "What about my job?" I asked, trying to keep her talking while I looked for any way out. "You emailed your boss this morning saying you had a family emergency and needed a week off." He was very understanding. She smiled. "I've been practicing your writing style. It's not that difficult to imitate." I felt sick. She'd been planning this, watching me, learning my habits and connections. For how long? Since before I moved in? Was that why the house had been such a good deal? Because she'd somehow scared off the previous owners? I saw a heavy vase on the side table and calculated my chances of grabbing it and defending myself. As if reading my mind, Mrs. Phillips picked it up. "Pretty, isn't it? I brought this over last week. The house needed a woman's touch." She placed it on a higher shelf, out of my reach. "Don't make this difficult, Rebecca. I've done this before. The transition is easier if you cooperate." "Done this before? There were others?" I needed to keep her talking. "Why me? Why this house?" Her expression softened into something almost wistful. "You remind me of my daughter. Same hair, same smile. She left me, you know. They all leave eventually. But you won't." "You had a daughter?" I asked, trying to sound interested rather than terrified. "I've had many daughters," she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality. "They never stay. They're ungrateful. But I've learned. The basement helps." I wasn't going to end up in that basement. While she was distracted with her rambling, I lunged for the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block on the counter. Mrs. Phillips didn't chase me. She just stood there, smiling. "The police won't believe you," she said calmly. "They never do. I'm a respectable widow who helps around the community. You're a divorced woman who's been under stress. Who seems more stable to you?" She had a point, and that terrified me more than anything. I backed toward the living room windows, knife still raised. They were locked too, but maybe I could break one. As I was weighing my options, I heard a car door slam outside. Mrs. Phillips froze, her eyes narrowing. Then another car door. Voices. I ran to the window and saw my sister's car in the street, along with a police cruiser. My sister was talking to an officer pointing at the house. Mrs. Phillips moved quickly, grabbing my wrist hard enough to bruise. "You'll tell them everything is fine," she hissed, "or I'll make sure they find something in your basement that will send you to prison for years." The doorbell rang, followed by knocking. My sister's voice called out, "Rebecca, are you in there?" Mrs. Phillips dragged me toward the door, her nails digging into my arm. "Remember what I said," she whispered, then plastered on a pleasant smile and unlocked the door. My sister's face flooded with relief when she saw me, then confusion at the sight of Mrs. Phillips. The police officer behind her looked between us. "Rebecca, thank God," my sister said. "You weren't answering your phone and your last few texts seemed off. I got worried and drove down." Mrs. Phillips' grip on my arm tightened in warning. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" the officer asked me directly. I looked at Mrs. Phillips, at her face frozen in that fake smile, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to be another daughter in her collection. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Everything is not all right. This woman has been stalking me, moving my things, and today she's locked me inside my own house." Mrs. Phillips' face contorted with rage. She tried to slam the door, but the officer blocked it with his foot. In the confusion, I broke away from her grip and ran outside to my sister. What happened next was chaos. Mrs. Phillips tried to flee out the back door, but a second officer was already there. They handcuffed her while she screamed that I was the crazy one, that I had invited her to live with me, that I was the danger. The police searched my house and found evidence I hadn't even discovered yet. Hidden cameras in every room, including my bathroom and bedroom. They found a laptop with folders of photos of me going back months, even before I moved in. There were recordings of my phone calls, copies of my emails, even my banking information. In the basement, they found what she'd been preparing: a small room with a cot, chains bolted to the wall, and a chemical toilet. On the wall were photos of other women, 3 of them, all with my general build and hair color, all missing. It turns out Mrs. Phillips isn't even her real name. The police are still piecing together her actual identity and history. The references she gave me were fake, friends of hers who played along. She'd been targeting women like me for years, working as a housekeeper to gain access to their homes and lives before making her move. I'm staying with my sister while the investigation continues. I can't bring myself to go back to that house, and I'm not sure I ever will. I jump at every noise and check the locks constantly. I can't use cleaning supplies because the smell reminds me of her. I've deleted my social media accounts and changed my phone number twice. The worst part is the knowledge that for weeks, while I slept, she was in my house watching me. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I hear someone whispering my name, and I wonder if that sound will ever leave me. They found a journal in her car with detailed plans for our life together. According to the police, I was days away from disappearing completely. If my sister hadn't noticed those strange texts Mrs. Phillips had sent pretending to be me, I would be another photo on that basement wall. I don't know how to feel safe again. I don't know if I ever will. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to tell someone. Writing it down might help me process everything that happened. My husband James and I moved to Pine Grove about 5 months ago. We'd been saving for years to buy our first home, and we were so excited when we found this little 3-bedroom on Maple Street. The neighborhood seemed perfect, quiet, well-kept, with mature trees lining the streets. The house needed some work, but nothing major. Just cosmetic stuff, like new paint and updating the kitchen eventually. We'd visited the property 3 times before closing, always during daylight hours on weekdays when most people were at work. I guess that's why we never really noticed anything off about the neighboring houses. The realtor mentioned that our immediate neighbor to the right was a bit of a homebody, but didn't elaborate. In retrospect, that should have been our first red flag. We moved in on a Saturday in early November. The weather was getting colder, but it was still nice enough to move without freezing. I remember standing in our driveway, directing the movers, when I first noticed the curtain movement next door. Just a slight parting of heavy burgundy drapes, then nothing. I figured our new neighbor was curious about who was moving in, which seemed normal enough. That first week, we were busy unpacking and settling in. I work from home as a graphic designer, while James commutes to the city for his accounting job. Being home all day, I started noticing little things. The neighbor's house, a similar layout to ours but painted a faded gray, always had its curtains drawn. No cars ever parked in the driveway. No mail piled up, though, so someone was definitely living there. Sometimes, walking past our kitchen window, I'd catch a glimpse of someone watching from next door. Just the barest hint of a face between curtains that would quickly disappear when I looked directly at it. I told myself not to be paranoid. They were probably just curious about the new neighbors. By our second week, I mentioned it to James. "Have you noticed our neighbor watching us?" I asked one evening while we ate dinner. "Which one?" he asked, mouth full of pasta. "The one on the right, the gray house." James shrugged. "Maybe they're just curious. We should bring over some cookies or something, introduce ourselves." The next day, I baked chocolate chip cookies and packaged them nicely on a plate with plastic wrap. I walked next door and rang the bell. I could hear it echo inside, but no one came to the door. I waited a solid 3 minutes, then rang again. Nothing. I was about to leave the cookies on the doorstep when something made me look up at the second-floor window. The curtain moved slightly, then stilled. Someone was definitely home, just choosing not to answer. I brought the cookies back home feeling unsettled. That night I told James what happened. "Probably just shy," he reasoned. "Some people are like that." Maybe he was right, but something felt off. Still, we were busy with our own lives, so I tried not to dwell on it. About 3 weeks after moving in, I noticed our garden trowel was missing from the shed. I clearly remembered using it to plant some bulbs for spring and returning it to its hook. James suggested I might have misplaced it, but I knew I hadn't. 2 days later, I found it stuck in our front yard near the property line with our neighbor's house. The metal was dirty, like it had been used to dig something up. "That's weird," James said when I showed him. "Maybe the wind blew it there." "James, it was inside our locked shed, and it weighs enough that wind couldn't move it." He frowned. "You're saying our neighbor took it?" I didn't have an answer, but the whole thing made me uncomfortable. A week later, our motion sensor lights started going off at random times during the night. The first time it happened around 2 a.m., James grabbed a baseball bat and went downstairs to check. He found nothing, but the next morning we discovered muddy footprints leading from our neighbor's yard to our back porch, then circling the house before returning next door. "This isn't normal," I told James. "Someone was walking around our house in the middle of the night." He agreed it was concerning, but still tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were chasing an animal or something? That weekend, we installed security cameras covering our front and back yards. The process took all day, and throughout it, I kept catching glimpses of our neighbor watching us through their windows. Just quick movements of the curtain, never a clear face. The cameras seemed to deter whatever was happening for about a week. Then, one night in mid-December, we were watching TV when we heard it, loud, rhythmic banging from next door. Not like someone hammering a nail, but more frantic, like someone pounding on walls or floors. Bang, bang, bang. Pause. Bang, bang, bang. It went on for nearly 20 minutes. James finally had enough and decided to check if everything was okay. I watched from our window as he walked next door and rang the bell. The banging stopped immediately, but no one answered the door. James rang again, then knocked loudly. Nothing. Yet the lights were on inside, and I could swear I saw movement through the windows. When James came back, he looked troubled. No answer, but someone's definitely in there. I could hear footsteps moving away from the door. That night the banging started again around 3 a.m., waking us both. It lasted about 5 minutes, then stopped. We lay awake, listening, but it didn't resume. The next morning was when things got even stranger. It had snowed overnight, just a light dusting of about an inch. When I went to get the newspaper, I noticed scratch marks on the side of our house, long parallel lines about 5 feet up from the ground, like someone had dragged something sharp across the siding. And in the fresh snow, there were footprints leading from our neighbor's house directly to our bedroom window, then back again. I called James outside to see. He took photos with his phone, his face serious. "This isn't right," he said quietly. "Someone was standing outside our window last night." We decided to call the police. An officer came by that afternoon, looked at the scratches and the now fading footprints, and took some notes. But he didn't seem particularly concerned. "Not much we can do here," he said. "Could be kids playing a prank. The scratches could be from a branch hitting your house." "What about the footprints?" I asked. "They lead directly from next door." The officer shrugged. "Without more evidence of malicious intent, there's not much we can pursue. Have you tried talking to your neighbor?" We explained our attempts to make contact. "Well, some people just want to be left alone," he said. "But call us if anything more concrete happens." We felt dismissed and vulnerable. That night, we double-checked all our locks and windows before bed. For a few days, things were quiet. No banging, no missing tools, no strange footprints. I started to wonder if maybe the officer was right. Perhaps it had all been coincidental or explainable. Then came December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. We'd gone to bed around 11 p.m. after watching a movie. I woke up sometime later thirsty and headed downstairs for water. Our bedroom is on the second floor, with a window that faces our neighbor's house. As I passed the window, something caught my eye. A figure standing in our yard, looking up. My blood ran cold. Our neighbor, I could tell it was them from the silhouette, was standing perfectly still in the snow, neck craned back, staring directly at our bedroom window. And they were smiling. Even in the dim glow of the streetlight, I could see that wide, unsettling grin. I froze, afraid to move in case they saw me. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I backed away slowly and went to wake James. "There's someone in our yard," I whispered urgently, shaking him. He bolted upright. "What? Who?" "Our neighbor. They're just standing there, looking at our window." James went to look. The figure was still there, unmoving despite the freezing temperature. "I'm calling 911, James said, grabbing his phone. While he was on the phone, I kept watching from a corner of the window. The neighbor suddenly moved, turning and walking deliberately back toward their house. By the time police arrived 20 minutes later, there was no one outside, but fresh footprints in the snow confirmed what we'd seen. The officers took our statement and went next door. Once again, no one answered, despite lights being on inside. They said without any actual crime being committed, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report about a suspicious person. We barely slept that night. The next day, Christmas Eve, we decided to stay with my parents who live about an hour away. We needed a break from the stress, and frankly, I was terrified to spend another night in our house. We returned on December 26th, hoping the holiday break had somehow reset things. For a few days, everything seemed normal. No banging, no watching, no footprints. Maybe our neighbor had gotten the message when police showed up. New Year's Eve, we decided to stay home rather than go out. Around 10 p.m., I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I happened to glance out the window. In the dim glow of our backyard sensor light, I saw movement. Our neighbor was in our backyard, digging frantically in the frozen ground with what looked like our missing garden shovel. "James!" I hissed, motioning him over. We watched in horror as the figure dug with manic energy, occasionally stopping to pull something from the ground. The dirt was dark and frozen, but they managed to create a hole about 2 feet deep. Then they reached down and lifted something out, something dark and unidentifiable. In the poor lighting, all I could see was that it was roughly the size of a shoebox and seemed to be wrapped in some kind of cloth. James immediately called 911 while I kept watching. The neighbor seemed oblivious to us, focused entirely on whatever they had unearthed from our yard. They were cradling it almost tenderly, rocking back and forth on their knees in the snow. This time, police responded in force. 2 patrol cars arrived with lights but no sirens, and 4 officers approached our backyard from different angles. We watched from our back door as they confronted our neighbor, who didn't resist when they handcuffed them. One officer picked up the object that had been dug up, now wrapped in what I could see was a dark cloth. They placed it carefully in an evidence bag. An officer came to our door to take our statement. He wouldn't tell us what had been found, only that our neighbor was being taken into custody and that we should expect to be contacted by detectives in the morning. "Is it safe for us to stay here tonight?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," he answered. "There's no immediate danger to you now." The next morning, 2 detectives came to our house. They asked many questions about our experiences with our neighbor and took detailed notes. They still wouldn't tell us exactly what had been found buried in our yard, only that it was evidence in an ongoing investigation and that our neighbor was being held without bail. One detective did say, "You folks were right to be concerned. This individual has issues that law enforcement has been aware of in other jurisdictions." "What does that mean?" James asked. "Are they dangerous?" The detective chose his words carefully. "Let's just say you were fortunate that we got here when we did." It's been 3 weeks now. Our neighbor remains in custody, and we've learned through local news that they're being investigated in connection with disappearances in 2 other states. The police dug up more of our backyard, but won't say what else they found. We're trying to decide whether to sell the house and move. Part of me wants to run away and never look back. Part of me feels like this is our home, and we shouldn't let what happened drive us away. Sometimes at night I still think I hear banging from next door, even though the house is empty now. And occasionally I catch myself checking the windows, looking for movement in the curtains that aren't there anymore. The police never told us exactly what was wrapped in that cloth, but sometimes in my dreams I see it clearly, and I wake up screaming, unable to describe what I've seen, even to James. Whatever our neighbor buried in our yard, I think part of it is buried in my mind now too, something I'll never be able to dig up or fully understand, and maybe that's for the best. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar and can tell me if the nightmares ever stop. 3 months ago, I moved into what I thought was my dream apartment in Riverside. After my breakup with Jake, I needed a fresh start, somewhere with big windows, natural light, and most importantly, a place that was just mine. The rent was reasonable for a 1-bedroom, and the complex seemed safe enough with its security doors and well-lit parking area. The apartment itself was on the 3rd floor with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard. Perfect, I thought. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I needed. I unpacked gradually, bought some plants, and started settling in. I even met a few neighbors, mostly young professionals and a retired couple down the hall who brought me cookies. It felt right. Then little things started happening. At first, it was so subtle, I thought I was just being forgetful. I could have sworn I had half a loaf of bread left, but when I went to make toast one morning, only 2 slices remained. I figured I'd eaten more than I remembered. Then my favorite coffee mug wasn't in the cabinet where I always kept it. I found it in the dishwasher, though I was certain I'd washed it by hand the night before. I chalked it up to stress from the new job and the move. When you're busy, your mind plays tricks on you, right? But then I noticed other things. My apartment has this weird layout where the bathroom connects to both the bedroom and the living room. One morning, I got up to use the bathroom and found the door to the living room side unlocked. I always locked it before bed, always. I'm kind of paranoid about bathroom privacy, even when living alone. Around week 3, I came home from work and immediately felt something was off. Nothing obvious was missing, but things weren't quite where I'd left them. My laptop was closed when I distinctly remembered leaving it open on the coffee table. The throw pillows on my couch were arranged differently. The blinds in the kitchen were halfway up when I always keep them down when I'm not home. I started paying closer attention. I began taking photos of my apartment before leaving and checking them when I returned. I wasn't crazy. Things were definitely being moved. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m., absolutely certain I'd heard a cabinet close in the kitchen. I lay frozen in bed, straining to hear more. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just the building settling or a neighbor's noise carrying through the walls. The next morning I found crumbs on my counter and an empty cereal box in the trash that had been half full the night before. That's when the fear really set in. Someone had been in my apartment while I was sleeping. I inspected every door and window. The front door had deadbolts and a chain, all intact. The windows were locked. The only other access point was the sliding door to the balcony, which had a security bar in place. Everything seemed secure. Then I noticed something on the balcony that made my blood run cold. There were dirty smudges on the outside windowsill, like footprints. Someone had climbed up to my 3rd-floor balcony. I called the police immediately. 2 officers came and took a report, but they seemed skeptical. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing valuable was missing. Not my laptop, not my TV, not the cash in my dresser. One officer suggested I might have sleepwalked and eaten the food myself. The other hinted that maybe I was just being a nervous single woman. I wanted to scream. They did walk around the perimeter of the building but found nothing suspicious. Before leaving, one officer suggested I keep a log of any other incidents, his tone making it clear he thought I was overreacting. I couldn't sleep that night or the next. I started pushing my dresser in front of my bedroom door before bed. I bought new locks for the balcony door and a doorstop alarm for my front door. I wasn't taking any chances. I also installed 2 security cameras, one facing my front door from inside and another in the living room with a view of the balcony door. They connected to an app on my phone so I could check them any time. It cost almost a full paycheck, but I didn't care. I needed to know what was happening in my apartment. For a few days, nothing unusual occurred. I started to wonder if maybe the police were right. Maybe I had been sleepwalking or just being forgetful. I even called my doctor to ask about possible side effects of my anxiety medication. Then it started again. A half-eaten yogurt in the trash I never opened. My toothbrush wet in the morning when I hadn't used it since the night before. A small handprint smudge on the bathroom mirror that wasn't mine. It was too small. The worst part? The cameras caught nothing. I reviewed hours of footage and saw no one enter or leave my apartment. The balcony door never opened. The front door remained closed. Yet things were still being moved and food was still disappearing. I started to question my own sanity. Was I having some kind of breakdown? Was I doing these things myself and not remembering? I even set up my phone to record myself sleeping one night, half afraid I'd see myself get up and wander around the apartment. The recording showed me sleeping soundly all night. Yet in the morning, the fruit bowl on my kitchen counter had been rearranged and an apple was missing. I called the building manager and demanded to know if anyone else had a key to my apartment. He insisted only he had a master key and it never left his office. I asked if there had been any reports of break-ins or strange occurrences in other units. He said no, but his eyes darted away when he answered. He was hiding something. I pressed him, and he finally admitted there had been a situation with the previous tenant of my unit. He'd been evicted for failing to pay rent, but the eviction had gotten ugly. The guy had made threats, damaged some property on his way out. The manager assured me the locks had been changed and the guy had moved out of state anyway. I wasn't satisfied with his answers. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept thinking I heard breathing coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. Twice I got up to check, but no one was there. I woke up around 4 a.m. to what sounded like footsteps in my living room. Soft, careful steps. I reached for my phone to check the security cameras, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the app. The living room feed showed an empty room. Nothing moved. The front door camera showed a closed door, but I could still hear the footsteps. They stopped outside my bedroom door. I heard what sounded like someone gently testing the handle. The dresser I'd pushed against the door shifted ever so slightly, the wood groaning against the floor. I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming, certain that whoever was out there would hear me if I made a sound. Several minutes passed with me holding my breath, my phone clutched to my chest. Eventually, I heard the footsteps retreat. I didn't sleep for what remained of the night. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours combing through my apartment, looking for how someone could be getting in. I checked the vents, inspected the ceiling for access panels, looked behind every piece of furniture. Nothing. I went back through all my security footage from the past week. This time, I watched at double speed, determined to catch something I might have missed. And that's when I saw it. A shadow passing quickly across the edge of the frame in the living room camera. It was there for only a second at 2:17 a.m. 3 nights before. I replayed that section at normal speed, then frame by frame. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a person, a figure in what looked like a hoodie, moving along the wall toward my kitchen, staying just at the edge of the camera's range. I felt vindicated and terrified all at once. I wasn't crazy. Someone was getting into my apartment. I immediately called the police again and showed them the footage. This time, they took me seriously. They did a thorough search of the building, checking the roof, the basement, and all common areas. They even brought in a detective who specialized in breaking and entering cases. That evening, 2 officers stationed themselves in the building, one in the stairwell near my floor and another in an unmarked car in the parking lot. I stayed with a co-worker, too scared to remain in my apartment even with police nearby. At 1:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera. Someone was in the hallway outside my apartment. The officers moved in and caught a man trying to pick the lock on my front door. It was the former tenant, a 38-year-old man named Leonard Gruber. The story that emerged over the next few days was more disturbing than anything I could have imagined. After being evicted, Gruber hadn't actually left the building. He'd been living in the building's crawl spaces and maintenance areas for months. He had created a sort of nest in the attic above the fourth floor, with bedding, food, and even some of my missing items. The police discovered he had been entering several apartments in the building, not just mine. He had somehow managed to make copies of keys before being evicted. For my newer locks, he had been coming in through the balcony, climbing up the exterior wall using the decorative stonework and drain pipes, explaining the footprints I'd found. The reason he hadn't been caught on my cameras. He knew exactly where they were and how to avoid them. The manager admitted that Gruber had once worked maintenance for the building years ago and knew every inch of the place, including blind spots in hallway security cameras and how to access units through unconventional means. What haunts me most is learning that on numerous occasions, Gruber had been in my apartment while I was sleeping. He would stand in my doorway and watch me. Sometimes he'd eat my food, use my shower, or just sit on my couch. The detective told me Gruber kept a journal where he wrote about the residents he observed, including detailed notes about my daily routine, what I ate, when I showered, what shows I watched. He'd been tracking my life like some twisted research project. The night I heard the footsteps in the dresser move, he'd been trying to get into my room. I still don't know what he planned to do if he had gotten in. They found a backpack in his attic nest containing items stolen from various apartments. Women's underwear, jewelry, photos taken from frames, even hair from brushes. Among them were several things I hadn't even noticed were missing. A bracelet I rarely wore, a lip gloss from my bathroom drawer, and a photo of me from my refrigerator door. Gruber is in custody now, facing multiple charges of breaking and entering, stalking, and theft. The apartment complex has installed additional security measures and offered to let residents break their leases without penalty. I moved out the day after they caught him. I couldn't stand the thought of spending another night there, knowing he had been watching me, touching my things, invading my space for months. I'm staying with a friend until I can find a new place, but I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe living alone again. Every night, I still check my closets and under my bed before going to sleep. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and paranoia. The worst part is knowing he was there, just feet away from me as I slept, watching and waiting. For what? I still don't know. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear footsteps again. My friend assures me it's just the normal sounds of her house, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I wonder if I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder or checking the locks 3 times before bed. They say Gruber will likely go to prison for several years. But what happens when he gets out? Will he come looking for me? Does he blame me for his capture? I keep asking myself what I could have done differently, how I could have noticed sooner. The police say I did everything right. I trusted my instincts, documented the incidents, installed security. But it doesn't feel like enough. Nothing feels like enough anymore. I've been trying to work up the courage to share this for months. Honestly, I'm still looking over my shoulder everywhere I go, but I need to get this out. Maybe it'll help someone else recognize the warning signs I missed. Last summer, I was desperate for a new place after my roommate gave me 2 weeks' notice that she was moving in with her boyfriend. The rental market in my area is brutal, so when I found a charming 2-bedroom house for a reasonable price, I jumped on it without thinking twice. Big mistake. The house was in Oakwood, about 25 minutes from downtown. older but well-maintained with a fenced backyard for my dog Murphy. It was built in the 1940s with those cute archways between rooms and original hardwood floors, the kind of place that usually goes for way more than I could afford. When I called about the listing, the landlord, Frank Becker, seemed eager to rent it out. He offered to show it to me that same day. Frank was probably in his late 50s, tall and thin with thinning gray hair that he combed over to hide his bald spot. He dressed like someone's dad, khakis and button-up shirts tucked in too tight. There was nothing obviously threatening about him, but something just felt off. He smiled too much without it reaching his eyes. When we shook hands, he held mine a few seconds too long. "You'll love it here, Emily," he kept saying, even before I'd decided to take it. "I can tell you're the perfect tenant for this place." Despite the weird vibes, I signed the lease the next day. The price was right, and I was out of options. Frank made a big deal about helping me move in, offering his truck and showing up with coffee when I didn't ask him to. I tried to be polite. After all, I thought, maybe he's just one of those overly friendly older guys. The first month was fine. I settled in, painted the kitchen a soft yellow, and set up my home office in the smaller bedroom. Murphy loved the yard, and I was starting to think my initial impression of Frank was wrong. Then the repairs started. The first time Frank called on a Tuesday afternoon. "Just checking in, Emily. Wanted to make sure the hot water heater is working properly. There have been some issues in the past." Before I could even respond, he added, "I'll be over in 20 minutes. I wasn't thrilled about the short notice, but figured it was legitimate. When he arrived, he spent way more time wandering through my house than looking at the water heater. He picked up framed photos of me with my family, asked personal questions about who I was dating, and even opened my refrigerator to check if the temperature was right. A week later, he texted that he needed to inspect the roof for leaks after a light rain. Then it was checking the air filters, then the foundation. Each time, he gave me barely any notice and spent most of his time looking through my stuff rather than doing any actual maintenance. One morning in my 3rd month there, I woke up to find him in my backyard, just standing there staring at my bedroom window. When I confronted him, he claimed he was checking the fence for loose boards, but couldn't explain why he needed to do that at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. "I like to get an early start," he said with that same empty smile. "You know me, always taking care of my properties." I started locking my windows compulsively and installed a cheap security camera in my living room. Part of me wanted to move out immediately, but finding another place I could afford seemed impossible. Plus, I kept doubting myself. Was I overreacting, being paranoid? Then came the basement incident. I rarely went down there because it was unfinished and creepy. Just concrete floors, exposed pipes, and a few storage shelves. One afternoon I came home early from work with a migraine and found Frank's truck in my driveway. I hadn't received any texts or calls about repairs. When I walked in, I heard shuffling from the basement. I called out, and Frank came up the stairs looking startled to see me. "Emily, you're home early." He had dust on his knees and was wearing work gloves. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Water damage check. There's been a lot of rain lately, and these old houses." He gestured vaguely toward the basement. "Just making sure everything's dry down there." It hadn't rained in over 2 weeks. "Next time, I need you to give me notice before you come over," I said firmly. Frank's face changed for just a second. His smile disappeared, and there was something cold in his eyes. Then the smile was back, but it felt even more forced. Of course, just trying to be thorough. You understand." After he left, I went down to the basement to see what he had really been doing. One section of the concrete floor looked different, lighter, as if it had been recently cleaned. There were scratch marks on one of the walls, and a shelf that had held some of my boxed belongings had been moved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Frank down there, alone in my house, doing who knows what. The next morning, I decided to start asking around about him. My neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen who had lived there for decades, initially seemed hesitant to talk about Frank. But after I shared some of my concerns, she opened up. "He's always been peculiar," she said carefully. "Very involved with his tenants. The young woman before you moved out suddenly, left a lot of her things behind." Another neighbor 2 doors down was more direct. "That man gives me the creeps," he said bluntly. "Always watching. My wife caught him looking through our daughter's window once. When we confronted him, he claimed he was checking for hornets' nests." Throughout the neighborhood, I heard similar stories. Frank had a reputation for checking in on female tenants frequently, making excuses to enter their homes, sometimes when they weren't there. One former tenant had filed a complaint with the police about missing underwear, but nothing came of it without proof. What disturbed me most was that no one seemed surprised by my questions. They all just nodded knowingly, as if Frank's behavior was an open secret in the neighborhood. I decided to look into his background online, but found surprisingly little. Frank Becker owned several properties in the area, but kept a low social media profile. I did find an old newspaper article mentioning him as a local businessman who had purchased several properties after inheriting money from his mother about 15 years ago. That weekend, while Frank was out of town visiting his sister, information he'd volunteered during one of his uninvited visits, I decided to check out the attic. I'd never been up there and figured it might have some clues about the house's history or previous tenants. The pull-down ladder creaked as I climbed up, flashlight in hand. The attic was stifling hot and filled with dust. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just old furniture, holiday decorations, and boxes that probably belonged to previous owners. Then I noticed something odd in the corner, a metal lockbox partially hidden under an old blanket. It wasn't locked. Inside were newspaper clippings, dozens of them, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. My blood ran cold as I started reading them. They were all about missing women. Some were just small notices, local woman still missing after 3 weeks, while others were longer articles. The dates ranged from 15 years ago to as recent as 8 months before I moved in. With shaking hands, I laid the clippings out on the dusty attic floor and began organizing them by date. A pattern emerged. Every year or so, a woman would disappear from areas where Frank owned property. None of the articles mentioned Frank, but the timing matched perfectly with when he had purchased his first houses. The most recent clipping was about Megan Halsey, age 26, the previous tenant of my house. She had left town unexpectedly, according to friends, abandoning most of her belongings. Police had investigated, but found no evidence of foul play. Her family insisted she would never leave without telling them. I felt sick. The strange behavior, the basement repairs, the unannounced visits, suddenly it all made horrifying sense. I took photos of everything with my phone, carefully put the lockbox back exactly as I had found it, and climbed down from the attic with my heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the old house made me jump. I kept thinking about the basement and what might be hidden under that freshly cleaned section of concrete. I decided I needed more evidence before going to the police. They'd already dismissed concerns about Frank in the past. I set up more security cameras around the house, hiding them in bookshelves and plants. I started keeping detailed records of every time Frank came over, what areas of the house he was interested in, and what excuses he gave. I installed motion sensors on all my doors and windows that would alert my phone if they were opened. A week later, my precautions paid off in the worst possible way. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. with an alert that my kitchen door had been opened. The security camera showed Frank entering with a key, moving quietly through my kitchen. He was wearing gloves and carrying a duffel bag. I had been sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a chair propped under the handle. I called 911 immediately, whispering into the phone as I heard Frank's footsteps on the stairs. The dispatcher told me to stay put and that officers were on their way. Those minutes waiting were the longest of my life. I could hear Frank moving around on the second floor, trying my bedroom door handle. When he found it locked, he started knocking. "Emily, are you awake? I thought I heard a noise in the attic, just checking to make sure everything's okay." I didn't answer. My body was frozen with fear, but my mind was racing. What was in that duffel bag? What was he planning to do? After what felt like an eternity, I heard sirens approaching. Frank's footsteps moved quickly down the stairs, and my phone alerted me that the kitchen door had opened again. The police arrived just as he was getting into his truck. They detained him based on my call and the security footage. When they searched his truck, they found the duffel bag containing duct tape, plastic zip ties, a hunting knife, and a syringe filled with what later turned out to be a powerful sedative. The investigation that followed uncovered the full horror. After getting a warrant to search Frank's home and other properties, police found trophies from missing women, jewelry, ID cards, personal items. Under the basement floor of one of his other rental houses, they discovered human remains. It turned out Frank had been using his position as a landlord to target women living alone for 15 years. He would spend months watching them, learning their routines, making copies of their keys, and preparing his repair alibis. My house, my charming, affordable house, had been one of his hunting grounds. The detective told me I was lucky. If I hadn't been suspicious early on and taken precautions, I would have become another missing person notice in Frank's collection. I moved out the next day, taking only what I could fit in my car. I'm in a cramped studio apartment now that costs more than the house did, but I don't care. I check the locks 3 times before bed every night. I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I hear footsteps on the stairs. Frank is in custody awaiting trial, but sometimes I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him standing there with that empty smile, telling me he's just there to check for leaks. The police are still digging, still identifying remains, still notifying families, and I'm still trying to understand how I lived for 3 months in a house where women disappeared, with a man who had been planning all along for me to be next. I've been wanting to write this down for a while now, but every time I try, my hands start shaking so bad I can barely type. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about those eyes staring at me through the darkness. I guess I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I moved to Bridgeport about 2 months ago. Not exactly by choice, more like necessity. My company downsized, I got laid off, and with rent prices skyrocketing everywhere, I had to find somewhere cheap fast. The apartment I found was nothing special. A 1-bedroom walk-up in a building that probably should have been condemned years ago. Paint peeling off the walls, windows that never quite closed right, and neighbors who seemed to think 3 a.m. was the perfect time to have domestic disputes. But it was all I could afford. and beggars can't be choosers, right? The neighborhood matched the apartment. Run down, forgotten, the kind of place where you double-check your locks at night and don't make eye contact with strangers. There were always homeless people around, which didn't bother me at first. I'm not one of those people who thinks homelessness is a crime. Most of them were just down on their luck, trying to survive like the rest of us. I first noticed him my third day after moving in. A tall, gaunt man with a matted beard and layers of dirty clothes despite the summer heat. He was sitting on the curb across from my building, just staring. Not at anything in particular, just gazing into space with this 1,000-yard stare. I didn't think much of it then, just another homeless guy with nowhere else to go. But then I noticed him again the next day, and the day after that. Always in slightly different spots, but always within sight of my building entrance. Sometimes he'd be digging through trash, other times just sitting there. I started noticing how he'd turn his head to watch me whenever I came or went. It made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being paranoid. About 2 weeks in, things changed. I was coming home from a job interview, which went nowhere, by the way, and he was standing right by my building's front steps. I had to walk past him to get inside. As I approached, he looked directly at me, and I mean directly at me, with these hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to burn right through me. "That's mine," he mumbled as I passed. I quickened my pace, pretending not to hear. But before I could get inside, he said it again, louder. "That's mine. You took what's mine." I hurried inside, heart pounding. What the hell was that about? I peeked through my window later and saw him still standing there, staring up at the building. He eventually wandered off after dark, but I didn't sleep well that night. After that, the encounters became more frequent and more disturbing. He'd be there almost every day, sometimes just watching, sometimes muttering to himself. But whenever I'd pass by, he'd focus on me with laser precision. The accusations got more specific. "You stole my home," he'd say, or "Thief, thief, I know what you did." I started varying my schedule, trying to come and go at different times, hoping to avoid him. Sometimes it worked, but he seemed to have a sixth sense about when I'd be around. I mentioned it to my neighbors, but they just shrugged it off. "That's just crazy Mike," one of them told me. "He's harmless, been around for years. Just ignore him." But it didn't feel harmless to me. Not when his voice started getting louder, more aggressive. Not when he began following me for half a block, still hurling accusations. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That a homeless guy was making me uncomfortable? They had actual crimes to deal with. Things came to a head last Tuesday. I had to work late at my new job, finally found something, stocking shelves at a grocery store. Not great, but it pays some bills. It was almost midnight when I got off the bus a block from my apartment. The street was completely deserted, which already had me on edge. The street lights in this neighborhood are a joke. Half of them don't work, and the ones that do give off this sickly yellow light that barely illuminates anything. As I walked toward my building, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. You know that sensation when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? Yeah, that. I kept looking over my shoulder but couldn't see anyone. The shadows between buildings seemed darker than usual, like they were hiding something or someone. I picked up my pace, clutching my keys in my fist, the one self-defense trick I remembered from some article. I was about 50 feet from my building when I heard shuffling footsteps behind me. Before I could turn around, a voice cut through the night air. "You can't hide from me anymore." I spun around, and there he was, standing under one of the few working streetlights. He looked worse than ever, thinner, dirtier, his clothes hanging off him like rags on a scarecrow. But it was his face that froze my blood. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, gleaming with a kind of feverish intensity I'd never seen before. His mouth was twisted into this horrible grimace, teeth bared like an animal. "Tonight, I take back what's mine," he growled and started moving toward me. I'd like to say I did something brave or smart, but the truth is, I just stood there for a second, paralyzed with fear. It wasn't until he was about 20 feet away and picking up speed that my survival instincts kicked in. I ran, full on sprinted toward my building, fumbling with my keys as I went. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps getting faster too, his breathing heavy and ragged. He was shouting now, screaming about how I'd stolen his life, his home, how he was going to make me pay. I reached the front door and jammed my key into the lock, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. The lock clicked just as I felt something brush against my back. I threw myself through the door and slammed it shut behind me, hearing a thud as he crashed against it from the other side. The pounding started immediately, his fists hammering against the door, the wood actually bending inward with each impact. Our building's front door isn't exactly Fort Knox. It's this thin wooden thing with a pathetic lock that barely works. I knew it wouldn't hold him for long. "Let me in," he screamed, his voice distorted with rage. "That's my home, my home." I scrambled up the stairs to my second-floor apartment, nearly falling twice because I was shaking so badly. I could still hear him downstairs, the pounding getting more frantic, interspersed with these animalistic growls that didn't even sound human anymore. I got to my apartment door, unlocked it, dropping my keys twice in the process, and practically fell inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and then shoved my rickety bookshelf in front of it for good measure. Then I grabbed my phone and called 911. Trying to explain what was happening between gasps for breath. The dispatcher kept telling me to calm down, to speak more clearly, asking me questions I could barely process. Was I hurt? Did the man have a weapon? What was my exact address? Meanwhile, I could hear the commotion moving from the front door to the stairwell. He'd gotten inside the building. His footsteps on the stairs were slow, deliberate, thud, 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 each one bringing him closer to my floor. I whispered into the phone, begging them to hurry, telling them he was coming for me. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way, but all I could think about was how thin my apartment door was, how easily he could break through if the front door hadn't stopped him. When he reached my floor, the footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence, and somehow that was worse than the noise. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall farthest from the door, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Then came his voice, so close it could have been in the room with me. "I know you're in there, Nathan." My blood turned to ice. I'd never told him my name, never spoke to him at all. How did he know who I was? "This is my home," he continued, his voice eerily calm now. "I lived here for 15 years before they took it away, threw me out on the street like garbage, and now you're in my home, sleeping in my bed." I heard him testing the doorknob, jiggling it gently at first, then more forcefully. When it didn't yield, he slammed against the door, making the whole frame shudder. My pathetic bookshelf inched backward with the impact. "You look like him, you know," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The man who evicted me. Same eyes, same smile. You, his son? You must be. Come to finish what he started." Another slam against the door. The bookshelf moved another inch. "I'm not who you think I am," I finally managed to say, my voice cracking with terror. "I just moved here. I don't know anything about what happened to you." He laughed, a horrible broken sound that made my skin crawl. "Liar!" he screamed, slamming into the door again with renewed fury. "All liars! You took everything from me!" The bookshelf tipped over with a crash, books and papers scattering across the floor. The door frame was starting to splinter. I backed into my bedroom, looking frantically for something, anything I could use as a weapon. All I could find was a cheap table lamp, which I yanked from the outlet and clutched in my trembling hands. Just as the door gave way with a horrible cracking sound, I heard sirens outside. Never in my life have I been so relieved to hear that sound. Through my bedroom window, I could see police lights flashing, illuminating the street below in pulses of red and blue. The man heard them too. The pounding stopped. There was a moment of silence, then I heard him say, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, "This isn't over. I'll always find you." Then came the sound of footsteps retreating, running down the stairs. I stayed frozen in my bedroom, lamp still clutched in my hands, until I heard voices in the hallway, deep, authoritative voices calling out, asking if anyone was there. "In here," I managed to croak out. "Please help me." 2 officers appeared in my doorway, flashlights sweeping across my wrecked apartment. They found me huddled in the corner of my bedroom, still shaking uncontrollably. One of them helped me up, while the other radioed that they'd found the victim and were searching for the suspect. They caught him trying to escape through the back of the building. It took 3 officers to restrain him. He was fighting like a man possessed, screaming my name, still insisting that I'd stolen his home. They put him in handcuffs and into the back of a police car. As they drove away, I could see his face pressed against the window, those hollow eyes still fixed on me, his mouth still moving, still making promises I couldn't hear but understood all the same. The officers took my statement and explained that the man, whose real name wasn't Mike but Thomas, was known to them. He had a history of mental illness and had been homeless for years after being evicted from an apartment in this building. Not my apartment specifically, they assured me, but one in the same building. They said they'd make sure he got the help he needed and that I shouldn't worry, he'd be off the streets for a while. They offered to call someone for me, but there was no one to call. I told them I'd be fine, that I just needed some rest. One of them helped me prop my broken door shut as best we could, promising to have a patrol car drive by throughout the night. After they left, I pushed my dresser in front of the damaged door and sat on my bed, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound from the street below. I kept seeing his face, those eyes, hearing his voice saying my name. How did he know my name? I moved out the next day, didn't even wait for morning, just threw some clothes in a backpack and went to a motel across town, maxing out my credit card for a week's stay while I figured out what to do next. I've found another place now, in a different neighborhood, and I'm trying to convince myself that it's over, that he's getting help, that he won't find me again. But sometimes, when I'm walking home at night, I find myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the shadows, convinced I can feel those eyes on me again. And when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear his voice, still making that promise. This isn't over. I'll always find you. I never thought I'd be the person writing one of these posts, but I need to get this off my chest. I still can't sleep through the night, and maybe typing this out will help somehow. I don't know. It all started back in January when I moved into this apartment in Riversdale. I'd just gotten a new job at the hospital across town, and I needed a place ASAP. This apartment seemed perfect, already furnished, decent rent, close to work. The building was this old brick 4-story with about 20 units, nothing fancy, but definitely not a dump either. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was this older guy, probably in his 60s, with this permanent frown. When he showed me around, he barely said anything beyond the basics. Rent's due on the 1st, no pets, no smoking, no late-night noise, that kind of stuff. I remember thinking he seemed annoyed that he had to rent the place at all, but I was desperate and the apartment itself was nice enough. The first few weeks were totally normal. I was settling in, getting used to my new job, figuring out where the closest grocery store was, all that stuff. Then the first letter came. It was just sitting there in my mailbox, a plain white envelope with Sarah written on it. No last name, no return address. I figured the mailman had put it in the wrong box, so I wrote wrong address on it and put it back in the outgoing mail slot. 2 days later, another letter showed up for Sarah, then another one the next day. After about a week of this, I started to get annoyed. I took one of the letters to Mr. Peterson's office in the basement of the building. "These keep coming for someone named Sarah," I told him, holding up the envelope. "Did she live in my apartment before me? Do you have a forwarding address?" Mr. Peterson barely looked up from his desk. "Sarah moved out. Didn't leave an address." "Okay, but these letters keep coming. Is there anything you can—" "Not my problem," he cut me off. "Throw 'em away or put 'em back in the mail. Up to you." So I did. I started tossing them in the trash. But then I noticed something weird. The envelopes weren't postmarked. They weren't coming through the regular mail at all. Someone was hand-delivering them to my mailbox. That's when I started to get a little freaked out. I mean, who was this Sarah person? And why was someone still dropping off letters for her at my apartment? After about 2 weeks of this, curiosity got the better of me. I opened one. I know, opening someone else's mail is illegal, but these letters were piling up in my mailbox, and I needed to know what was going on. The letter inside was handwritten on plain notebook paper. "Sarah, I know what you did. You can't hide from me forever. I'm watching you." A chill ran down my spine when I read that. I quickly opened another one. "Sarah, did you think changing your phone number would help? Nothing will help. I'm getting closer." And another. "Sarah, I saw you yesterday. Nice blue shirt. You looked scared. Good." That last one really freaked me out because I had worn a blue shirt the day before. I remember standing at my kitchen window, drinking coffee, wearing my favorite blue button-up. Someone was watching me. Someone who thought I was Sarah. I immediately went back to Mr. Peterson's office. This time I wasn't so polite. "I need to know about Sarah," I demanded, slapping the opened letters on his desk. "Someone is stalking her, and now they're stalking me thinking I'm her. These letters are threatening." Mr. Peterson's face changed when he saw the contents of the letters. For a second, I thought I saw fear in his eyes. "Sarah Keating," he finally said, "lived in your unit for about 8 months. Paid her rent on time until she didn't. Came home one day about 3 months ago and her apartment was empty. No notice, nothing. Just gone. And you have no forwarding address? No emergency contact?" "Nope." Like I said, she just disappeared. Happens sometimes. People run from things. He pushed the letters back toward me. "If you're getting threats, call the police. Not my problem." But I didn't call the police. Not yet. What would I say? "Hi, I'm getting letters for the previous tenant, and I opened them and they're creepy." I didn't think they'd take it very seriously. Instead, I started paying more attention to my surroundings. I noticed things I hadn't before, like how the fire escape outside my bedroom window was easily accessible from the alley, or how the lock on my front door was pretty flimsy, or how the building across from mine gave a perfect view into my living room windows. I started closing my blinds, all of them, all the time. I'd peek through them occasionally, scanning the street, the building across from me, looking for anyone watching. But I never saw anyone suspicious. The letters kept coming, one every day now, sometimes two, each one more threatening than the last. Sarah, did you change your hair? Brunette doesn't suit you. I preferred you as a blonde. I had dark brown hair. Had Sarah been blonde? Or was this person watching me so closely they knew I'd dyed my hair months before moving in? Sarah, I was so close to you today. You didn't even notice me. Next time you will. Sarah, have you checked under your bed lately? You should. That one sent me into a panic. I grabbed a kitchen knife and checked under my bed, inside my closets, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. But the fear was real. The feeling of being violated was real. I decided to change my locks. When I told Mr. Peterson, he flat out refused. No changing locks without my permission, he said. Building policy. But someone could have a key to my apartment, I argued. The previous tenant, all keys were returned, he insisted. Besides, changing the locks costs money. You want new locks, you pay for them. I was ready to pay, but he still wouldn't budge. Said it was against building policy for tenants to change locks without management doing it, and management wasn't going to do it without a valid reason. Apparently, creepy stalker letters didn't qualify. So I took matters into my own hands. I bought a security camera on Amazon, one of those small ones that connects to your phone. I set it up in my living room facing the front door. I also bought door and window alarms, the kind that shriek if they're opened. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The letters kept coming, but my camera didn't pick up anything inside my apartment. Then, on the 4th night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a weird sound, like something scraping against my front door. I froze in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My phone was on my nightstand, and I could see on the camera app that my living room was empty. The sound continued, scratch, 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 and then stopped. I stayed frozen in bed until morning, too terrified to check the door. When daylight came, I cautiously went to look. There were fresh scratches on the outside of my door, right around the lock. Someone had tried to get in. That's when I decided to find out more about Sarah Keating. I started with my neighbors, knocking on doors asking if anyone knew her. Most people claimed they didn't. I keep to myself, they'd say, or I just moved in recently. But one older woman on the first floor, Mrs. Garza, got a strange look on her face when I mentioned Sarah's name. "Why are you asking about her?" she asked, clutching her cardigan closed. "I keep getting her mail," I said, not wanting to mention the threatening nature of the letters, just trying to forward it to her. Mrs. Garza looked both ways down the hall before speaking in a low voice. Sarah was troubled, always arguing with someone on the phone, always looking over her shoulder. "Do you know why she left so suddenly?" Mrs. Garza shook her head. "No, but I wasn't surprised when she did. That girl was scared of something, or someone." She started to close her door. "If I were you, I'd stop looking for her. Some people don't want to be found." Her words stuck with me. What had Sarah been running from, and why was it following me now? The next day, another letter came. This one was different. It was in a manila envelope, thicker than the others. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a Polaroid photograph of me, standing in my kitchen, drinking coffee, wearing my blue shirt. It was taken through my window from the building across the street. On the back, someone had written in jagged, angry letters, "I'm always watching." I dropped the photo like it had burned me. This was real. This was happening. This wasn't some mistake or mix-up. Someone was watching me, not Sarah. I called in sick to work and spent the day in a panic. I covered every window with blankets. I pushed my couch against my front door. I called the police. 2 officers came, a man and a woman. They looked at the letters, the photo. They took notes. They asked if I had any enemies, any exes who might be doing this. They asked if I'd noticed anyone following me. They were professional, but I could tell they weren't that concerned. Unfortunately, miss, unless there's an explicit threat or an attempt to break in, there's not much we can do, the male officer said. Keep a record of everything. Call us immediately if you feel you're in danger. They left, taking the photo and a few of the letters as evidence. But I knew they wouldn't do anything. Not yet. Not until something worse happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Not unusual in an apartment building, except these stopped right outside my door. Then silence. After what felt like an eternity, I heard them walk away. I checked my security camera footage in the morning. Nothing inside my apartment. But when I left to get more supplies, extra locks, a baseball bat, pepper spray, I found another envelope taped to my door. This time, when I opened it, a small key fell out. A key to my apartment. That was it. I couldn't stay there another night. I threw some clothes and essentials in a bag and headed for a hotel across town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my parents. I paid in cash and used a fake name at check-in. From the safety of my hotel room, I called Mr. Peterson and told him I was breaking my lease. I didn't care about the deposit. I didn't care about anything except getting away from that apartment. You're still responsible for the rent until I find a new tenant, he said coldly. Someone has a key to my apartment, I said. Someone is stalking me. I'm not paying for an apartment I can't safely live in. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Look, he finally said, his voice different now, almost worried. Maybe we can work something out. Come by the office tomorrow. But I never went back. Not to his office, not to the apartment. I sent a friend to collect the rest of my stuff a week later. Most of it I just abandoned. It wasn't worth the risk. I'm staying with my parents now, in another state. I've changed my phone number, deleted my social media. I'm trying to disappear, just like Sarah did. But every time I check the mail, my heart races. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, I freeze. Every time I see someone looking at me for too long, I wonder, is that them? I still don't know who was sending those letters. I don't know if they were really meant for Sarah or if someone was targeting me all along. I don't know if Sarah is safe somewhere or if... Well, I try not to think about the alternatives. All I know is that somewhere out there, someone is watching, and they might still be looking for me. I wish I could say this story has a resolution, but it doesn't. It just stopped. I ran, and for now, the letters have stopped coming. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear scratching at my door. And sometimes, when I look out my window, I feel eyes looking back at me. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I've been debating whether to share this for months. My therapist thinks it might help me process everything, but I'm still not sure. What happened to us in that house? I can't explain it and nobody believes me anyway. My husband thinks I had some kind of breakdown. Maybe writing it all down will help me make sense of it. We moved to Willowbrook last February. After years of saving, we finally had enough for a down payment on our first real house. Rob got a promotion at the insurance firm. The kids were at good ages. Emma 8, Jake 5. And the market had just cooled enough that we could afford something decent. The house on Maple Street seemed perfect. 3 bedrooms, a big yard for the kids, and that charming older home character you can't find in new builds. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd moved to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. At least, that's what our realtor told us. The price was surprisingly reasonable for the neighborhood, which should have been our first warning sign. But we were so excited to have found a house in our budget in such a good school district that we didn't question it. Moving day was exhausting, but exciting. The kids ran around claiming bedrooms while Rob and I directed the movers. I remember standing in the empty living room that first afternoon, sunlight streaming through the big bay windows, thinking we'd made it. This was our forever home. The first week was normal, just the usual chaos of unpacking and settling in. I was busy hanging curtains, arranging furniture, and trying to get the kids enrolled in their new school. I barely noticed the little things at first. A cup I swore I'd left on the counter appearing in the sink. Jake's favorite toy car disappearing only to show up under his pillow 2 days later. The kind of things that happen in any house, especially during a move when everything's in disarray. But then I started noticing the sounds. It began with creaking. Old houses make noise, I know that. But this was different. The creaking would follow a pattern, like footsteps walking slowly down our upstairs hallway, always around 3 a.m. I'd wake up and lie perfectly still, listening to those measured steps that seemed to pause outside each bedroom door before continuing on. Rob slept through it all. When I mentioned it over breakfast, he laughed it off. "It's an old house, Jen. The wood expands and contracts with temperature changes." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him at first. Then came the misplaced items. Not just occasionally anymore, but constantly. I'd set my keys on the hook by the door, only to find them in the kitchen drawer. Emma's homework would vanish from her backpack and reappear under the sofa. Rob's watch would migrate from his nightstand to the bathroom sink overnight. "Mom, someone moved my dolls again," Emma complained one morning, about 3 weeks after we'd moved in. She had arranged her favorite dolls on her shelf the night before, but now they were sitting in a circle on the floor. "You probably did it in your sleep, honey," I told her. But the look she gave me made my stomach twist. She was scared. That night, I heard the whispers for the first time. I'd gotten up to use the bathroom around 2:30 a.m. when I heard it. A soft, indistinct murmuring coming from somewhere down the hall. I froze, my hand on the bathroom doorknob, straining to hear. It sounded like someone having a conversation, but the words were too quiet to make out. I followed the sound to Jake's room, thinking maybe he was talking in his sleep, but when I pushed his door open, he was sound asleep, his little chest rising and falling steadily. The whispering stopped the moment I entered his room. I checked Emma's room next, also sleeping peacefully. I stood in the hallway, goosebumps rising on my arms as I tried to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, like it was seeping through the walls themselves. "Rob," I whispered, shaking him awake when I returned to our bedroom. "There's someone in the house." He grabbed his phone to use as a flashlight and checked every room, closet, and hiding place while I huddled in our bed, heart pounding. Of course, he found nothing. "It was probably just the neighbor's TV," he said, crawling back into bed. "Sound carries weirdly in these old houses." But our nearest neighbors were a good 50 feet away. The next day, while the kids were at school and Rob was at work, I searched the house myself. I checked every closet, looked under every bed, examined the basement and all the storage spaces. I don't know what I expected to find. Signs of an intruder, maybe. But what I really feared was finding nothing at all. Because if there wasn't someone in our house, Then what was causing the footsteps, the whispers, the moved objects? I found nothing unusual, just the normal accumulation of a family's possessions, still partly in boxes. But as I stood in the upstairs hallway, I noticed something I hadn't before, a small pull-down door in the ceiling, the attic. We'd been told the house had attic storage, but in the chaos of moving, I'd forgotten about it. I found a broom and used the handle to pull the cord, unfolding a set of narrow wooden stairs. Dust rained down as the stairs extended to the floor. I hesitated at the bottom. The attic opening was a black square above me, and I suddenly didn't want to go up there. But I needed to know if someone was living in our house. I grabbed a flashlight from the hall closet and slowly climbed the creaking steps. The attic was surprisingly large, extending over the entire house. The pitched roof made it impossible to stand upright, except in the center. Boxes from the previous owners lined one wall. They'd promised to come back for them, but never had. Otherwise, the space was empty except for dust, cobwebs, and a few dead insects. No sign of anyone living there. No bedroll, no food wrappers, nothing to indicate a human presence. I felt relieved, but also strangely disappointed. At least an intruder would have been an explanation. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something scratched into one of the support beams. I moved closer, squinting to make it out. They are in the walls. My blood went cold. The scratches looked old, the edges softened by years of dust. I backed away, suddenly desperate to get out of that dark, stifling space. I hurried down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste, and slammed the attic door shut. That night at dinner, I tried to act normal for the kids' sake, but Rob noticed something was off. "What's wrong?" he asked after we'd put Emma and Jake to bed. I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "I checked the attic today," I finally said. "And?" "There was something scratched into one of the beams. They are in the walls." Rob stared at me for a moment, then laughed. "Probably some kid playing a prank years ago. You're getting worked up over nothing, Jen." "Then explain the footsteps at night, the whispers, things moving around." "Old house noises and forgetfulness," he said dismissively. "You've been stressed with the move. It's normal to be a little scattered." I wanted to argue, to make him understand that something wasn't right with this house, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. The truth was, I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. That night I lay awake long after Rob had fallen asleep. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Around 3 a.m., right on schedule, the footsteps started. Step, creak, down the hallway, pausing outside our bedroom door for several long seconds before continuing on. I nudged Rob, but he just grunted and rolled over. The footsteps continued to Emma's room, paused, then moved on to Jake's. Something protective and fierce rose up in me. Whatever was in our house was showing interest in my children, and that was unacceptable. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat we kept in our closet. Hands shaking, I opened our bedroom door and peered into the dark hallway. Empty. The footsteps had stopped. I checked on the kids, both still sleeping peacefully. As I stood in Jake's doorway, watching the rise and fall of his little chest, I heard it again, the whispering. This time, it seemed to be coming from inside the walls of his room. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper, straining to make out words. The murmuring was just beneath the threshold of understanding, like a radio tuned between stations. But there was definitely rhythm to it, cadence. This wasn't pipes knocking or the house settling. Something, or someone, was talking inside our walls. I spent the rest of the night in Jake's reading chair, bat across my lap, listening as the whispers faded in and out until dawn broke. The next day was Saturday. While Rob took the kids to the park, I called our home inspector and asked if there could be spaces between our walls where someone could hide or move around. "Not in a house that age," he assured me. "The wall construction is simple lath and plaster. There's no room for anyone to move around in there, and certainly no connections between rooms. You'd have to physically break through the walls." I thanked him and hung up, more confused than ever. That afternoon, I found my mother's antique locket, the one I always kept in my jewelry box, sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. I hadn't worn it since we moved. I hadn't even unpacked it yet. "Rob, did you put this here?" I asked, holding up the locket when he came in from mowing the lawn. He looked confused. "No, why would I? Is that your mom's necklace?" "Emma? Jake?" I called. "Did either of you take Mom's necklace out of her jewelry box?" They both denied it, and I believed them. Emma knew how special it was to me, and Jake couldn't even reach my jewelry box on the high dresser. I put the locket back in its velvet pouch and returned it to my jewelry box, making sure the lid was securely closed. That night, the scratching started. It was just after midnight, and I'd finally fallen into an uneasy sleep when the sound pulled me back to consciousness. A persistent, frantic scratching coming from above us, from the attic. I sat up, fully awake now, listening as the scratching moved from one part of the ceiling to another. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I nudged Rob awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. For once, he did. He sat up, frowning as he listened to the manic scratching overhead. "Probably raccoons or squirrels," he said, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "I'll check it out in the morning." "No, we need to check now," I insisted. "What if they chew through electrical wires or something?" Rob sighed but got out of bed. We crept down the hallway to where the attic stairs were located. The scratching was louder here, more desperate. "I'll go up," Rob said, reaching for the pull cord. "I'm coming with you," I told him. No way was I staying down here alone. But as soon as the attic stairs unfolded, the scratching stopped. Complete silence fell over the house. Rob climbed up first, sweeping his phone flashlight across the attic space. I followed close behind, my heart pounding. The attic looked exactly as it had the day before. Dusty, cobwebbed, empty except for the previous owner's boxes. No animals, no intruders, no explanation for the frantic scratching we'd both heard. "See? Nothing," Rob said, but his voice lacked conviction. I moved toward the support beam where I'd seen the scratched message before, but it was gone. The beam was smooth, unmarked. I ran my fingers over the wood, feeling for indentations, but there was nothing. "I saw it," I insisted. "Right here. They are in the walls." Rob gave me a concerned look. "Jen, there's nothing there. Are you feeling okay?" I wasn't sure anymore. Was I losing my mind, imagining things that weren't there? We went back downstairs, and Rob fell asleep almost immediately. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the scratching to resume, but it didn't. Instead, around 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again, followed by the whispers. Louder this time, more insistent. I slipped out of bed and followed the sounds to Jake's room. The whispering was definitely coming from inside his walls. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper again, and this time I could almost make out words. "Time is running out." "Not safe here." "Should never have come." A chill ran down my spine. I hurried back to our bedroom and shook Rob awake. "We need to get the kids and leave," I told him. "Right now." "What?" "Jen, it's the middle of the night." "Something's wrong with this house," I insisted. The whispering, I could understand it this time. It's warning us. Rob sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. "Jen, listen to yourself. You're talking about voices in the walls. Do you know how that sounds? I don't care how it sounds. I know what I heard. You're stressed and overtired from the move, he said in that maddeningly reasonable tone. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist. I'm not crazy, Rob, I hissed, trying to keep my voice down so I wouldn't wake the kids. Fine. If you won't believe me, I'll prove it to you. I stormed out of our bedroom and back to the attic stairs. I was going to find evidence, something, anything that would convince him I wasn't losing my mind. The scratching started again as I pulled down the attic stairs, more frenzied than before. Good. Maybe now I'd catch whatever was causing it. Jen, come back to bed, Rob called from our doorway, but I ignored him and climbed the stairs. The attic was pitch black, except for the beam of my phone flashlight. The scratching was louder up here, seeming to come from the far corner where the roof sloped down to meet the floor. I moved toward it, sweeping my light back and forth. Nothing, just bare floorboards and roof beams. But the scratching continued, urgent and desperate, right where I was standing. I knelt down, running my hands over the wooden floor. That's when I felt it, a small gap between two floorboards, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I dug my fingernails into the gap and pulled. A small section of the floor lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. The scratching stopped the moment my fingers touched the book. I opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with cramped, desperate handwriting, dated 1973. I flipped through it quickly, catching fragments. The sounds started a week after we moved in. Martha insists someone is walking in the hallway at night. Found my father's watch in the middle of the dining table when we haven't unpacked it yet. The children say someone whispers to them through the walls. The final entry was dated April 17th, 1973. They're getting closer. The whispers are clearer now. They say we need to leave before it's too late. Martha wants to go to her sister's, but I've put too much into this house to abandon it now. Whatever is here, we can outlast it. We just need to be stronger than our fears. There were no more entries after that. With the journal clutched to my chest, I scrambled back down the attic stairs to find Rob. Look at this, I said, thrusting the journal at him. The family that lived here in the 70s experienced the same things we are. The footsteps, the whispers, objects moving around. Rob took the journal reluctantly, flipping through a few pages. Where did you find this? In a hidden compartment in the attic floor. The scratching led me to it. He handed it back to me with a sigh. Jen, this could be anything. A creative writing project, a prank. It doesn't prove. A loud crash from downstairs cut him off. We both froze, listening. Stay here, Rob whispered, heading for the stairs. No way, I replied, following close behind him. We crept down the staircase together. The house was silent again, but as we reached the bottom step, I saw what had made the noise. Every single kitchen cabinet was open, and the contents, dishes, glasses, food, had been swept onto the floor. It looked like a tornado had hit. Still think I'm imagining things? I asked Rob, whose face had gone pale. Before he could answer, Emma appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. Mom? Dad? What's that noise? Nothing, sweetheart, I said, moving to block her view of the kitchen chaos. Just a little accident. Go back to bed. But the lady said I should come downstairs, Emma said sleepily. My blood ran cold. What lady, Emma? The one who whispers through my wall. She said to come downstairs because it's not safe upstairs anymore. Rob and I exchanged glances. Without a word, he hurried upstairs to get Jake while I grabbed Emma's hand. We're going to Grandma's for a bit, okay? I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. We threw some essentials into a suitcase, bundled the kids into the car, and left at 4 a.m. As we backed out of the driveway, I looked up at the house one last time. A shadow moved across the attic window, a distinctly human silhouette watching us leave. We never went back. Rob returned once with his brother to grab more of our things, but I couldn't make myself cross that threshold again. We stayed with my mother until we found a new place, telling everyone there was a mold problem in the Willowbrook house. The journal disappeared from our suitcase somewhere between the house and my mother's place. Rob thinks I misplaced it in our hasty departure. I know better. We sold the house at a loss 3 months later. I didn't have the heart to warn the new owners. What would I even say? Besides, maybe it was just us. Maybe the house didn't like us specifically. But sometimes, even now in our new home 20 miles away, I wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. And last week, I found my mother's locket sitting in the middle of our kitchen table when I came down for breakfast. I think whatever was in that house followed us. Or maybe it was never in the house to begin with. Maybe it was attached to one of us all along. All I know is that I still hear the whispers sometimes, faint but persistent, coming through the walls. Get out before it's too late. But where can you go when the haunting isn't in your house, but in you? I've always been a city person. The constant noise, the traffic, the people rushing everywhere. It was my normal. But after 3 years of working nonstop at this tech startup in Seattle, I was completely burned out. My boss noticed it too. He practically forced me to take a month off, saying I'd be useless if I kept going at this pace. I didn't argue. I found this cabin rental online, Pinewood Forest, about 2 hours outside of Seattle. The photos looked amazing. All wood interior, huge windows overlooking dense forest, a little lake nearby. The listing said, perfect for those seeking solitude and reconnection with nature. That's exactly what I needed. When I arrived, the place was even more beautiful than the pictures. The owner, Mrs. Callahan, met me there to hand over the keys. She was a sweet older lady who told me she'd inherited the property from her brother a year ago and had been renting it out since. She showed me around, explained how the wood stove worked, pointed out where extra supplies were kept. Normal stuff. Nothing weird. The first week was, honestly, it was incredible. I slept better than I had in years. During the day, I'd hike or sit on the porch reading. At night, I'd have a beer while looking at more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. The silence took some getting used to. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat sometimes, but I grew to love it. It was during the second week that things changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. on Tuesday night. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, creaking floorboards inside the cabin. My first thought was that it might be an animal that had somehow gotten in. But the steps were too deliberate, too human. They were slow and measured, like someone trying not to make noise but still needing to move around. I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. Then silence, complete silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. The door began to open slowly. I should have done something, grabbed my phone, looked for a weapon, anything. But I just lay there, paralyzed, watching as the door swung open. A tall figure stood in the doorway. The cabin was dark, but the moon was full that night, and it cast enough light through the window that I could make out the silhouette of a man. He was wearing what looked like jeans and a flannel shirt. His hair was disheveled, and he had a beard. I couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something off about his posture. like he was somehow both rigid and unsteady at the same time. "Hello, Morgan," he said. My blood turned to ice. How did he know my name? I managed to reach over and turn on the bedside lamp. In the sudden light, I could see him properly. He looked to be in his 40s, with a weathered face and eyes that didn't seem to focus properly. His clothes were dirty and worn, like he'd been wearing them for days, weeks maybe. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely working. "How did you get in here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I live here," he said simply. "This is my home." I sat up in bed, clutching the covers like they could protect me. "No, you don't. I rented this cabin. You need to leave right now, or I'm calling the police." He shook his head slowly. "No phone service up here. You know that." He was right. There was no cell service. The owner had mentioned a landline for emergencies, but it was in the kitchen, past where this man was standing. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I told you. This is my home." His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, a kind of desperation. "I've lived here for years. This is where I belong." "The owner is Mrs. Callahan," I said. "She inherited it from her brother. If you had some arrangement with them—" "No!" he suddenly shouted, making me flinch. That's not right. That's not how it works. This cabin is mine. It's part of me. I'm part of it." His speech was becoming more frantic, less coherent. "The trees know me. The walls know me. I carved my name into the underside of the porch steps when I was 12. I buried my dog by the big oak tree down the path. This place is in my blood." He took a step toward me and I pressed myself against the headboard. "I just need to stay here," he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I need to be here. I need... He trailed off, looking confused, like he'd lost his train of thought. I saw my opportunity. "Listen," I said, trying to sound calm. "It's the middle of the night. Why don't you come back tomorrow? We can talk to Mrs. Callahan, sort this out properly." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, that makes sense. Tomorrow." He turned toward the door, then looked back at me. "You're in my bed," he said, but there was no anger in it. Just a statement of fact. "I'll be gone soon," I promised, having no intention of staying another night. He nodded again, then walked out. I heard his footsteps move through the cabin, then the front door opened and closed. I waited about 10 seconds, then jumped out of bed and ran to lock it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I checked all the windows too. They were still locked from the inside. How had he gotten in? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall, holding a kitchen knife I'd retrieved after triple checking that the cabin was empty. Every creak, every whisper of wind made my heart race. When morning finally came, I packed my things immediately. I was getting out of there. I called Mrs. Callahan from the landline and told her I needed to see her urgently. She said she'd meet me at the cabin in an hour. While waiting, I checked the entire cabin for any sign of how the man had gotten in. All doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no broken glass, no forced entry. It made no sense. Mrs. Callahan arrived looking concerned. "Morgan, is everything all right? You sounded upset on the phone." I told her everything. The man in my room, his claims about the cabin, how he knew my name. As I spoke, the color drained from her face. "Did he tell you his name?" she asked when I finished. "No," I said. "Who is he?" She sat down heavily on one of the kitchen chairs. I think you might have met Daniel Holt." "Who's Daniel Holt?" "He was the previous tenant, before I started renting the cabin out to vacationers." She twisted her hands in her lap. "He lived here for about 5 years, kept to himself mostly, paid his rent on time." So what happened? Did you evict him or something? She shook her head. No, nothing like that. He disappeared about 14 months ago. Just vanished. Left all his things behind. Clothes, books, even his wallet and ID. The police investigated, but they never found any trace of him. It was like he just walked into the forest and never came back. I felt cold all over. But I saw him last night. He was here. Morgan. She looked at me with pity. Daniel Holt has been missing for over a year. Most people around here think he's dead. Then who was in my bedroom? I demanded. I don't know, she admitted. But it couldn't have been Daniel. I told her I was leaving. She understood and even offered to refund the rest of my rental period. But as I was about to walk out the door, something made me stop. Mrs. Callahan. He said he carved his name under the porch steps when he was 12, and that he buried his dog by a big oak tree. She frowned. That's strange. Daniel only lived here 5 years as an adult. He wouldn't have been here as a child. Can we check? The porch steps? She hesitated, then nodded. We went outside and crouched down by the wooden steps leading to the porch. I had to lie on my stomach to see underneath. And there it was, carved into the wood. DH 1986. Mrs. Callahan looked shocked. That's impossible. My brother only built this cabin in 2003. We walked down the trail from the cabin until we came to a massive oak tree. The ground around one side looked different, not freshly dug, but like it had been disturbed years ago and never quite settled back properly. I think I need to call the police, Mrs. Callahan said quietly. I left that day, drove straight back to Seattle with my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself I was done with the whole thing. Whatever was happening at that cabin, whoever that man was, it wasn't my problem anymore, except I couldn't stop thinking about it, about him, the desperation in his eyes, the certainty in his voice when he said the cabin was his home. After 3 days back in the city, I called Mrs. Callahan. The police had come and searched the property again, she told me. They'd dug under the oak tree and found the remains of a small dog buried decades ago. They were running tests on the cabin itself now, taking samples from the foundation, the walls. Something about the timeline not making sense. Are you still renting it out? I asked. Not until the investigation is complete, she said. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt a strange pull to go back, like there was something unfinished. I tried to ignore it, went back to work, fell into my normal routine, but I couldn't sleep. Every night I'd jolt awake around 3 a.m., certain someone was in my apartment. After 2 weeks of this, I took another weekend off and drove back to Pinewood Forest. I didn't tell Mrs. Callahan I was coming. I just parked on the main road and hiked in, telling myself I just needed closure. Needed to see the cabin one more time in daylight to convince myself there was nothing supernatural going on. The cabin looked different somehow, older. The police tape was still across the door, but it had been torn, probably by the wind. I stood on the edge of the clearing, just looking at it. In daylight, with birds singing and sunlight filtering through the trees, it was hard to recapture the fear I'd felt that night. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the porch, a piece of paper pinned under a rock. I walked closer. It was a note written in messy handwriting. Morgan, I'm sorry I frightened you. Please come back. I need to explain. DH. I backed away from the porch. How did he know I would come? How long had that note been sitting there? I didn't take the note. I didn't go inside. I turned and walked quickly back to my car, fighting the urge to run. That night, back in my Seattle apartment, I finally slept through until morning. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd closed a door, on whatever strange connection had been forming. I decided to put the whole experience behind me. 3 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door at 11 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw an empty hallway. Another knock. I looked again. Nothing. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. Against all better judgment, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but there on my welcome mat was a small wooden box. Inside was a key, old iron, the kind people used a century ago. And a note. "This opens the real door. Come home. D.H." I threw the box away immediately, told myself it was someone's sick joke. Maybe Mrs. Callahan had given my address to the police and the story had leaked somehow. But that night, I woke at exactly 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in my apartment, creaking floorboards, just like at the cabin. I lay frozen in my bed, listening as they approached my bedroom door. The doorknob turned slowly, but my bedroom door was locked. I always lock it now. "Morgan," came a voice from the other side. His voice. "I found my way to you instead, but it's wrong here. We need to be home, in the cabin." "Go away," I managed to say. "You're not real." A pause, then a soft laugh. "I'm as real as the cabin, as real as the forest, as real as you. What do you want from me?" "I told you. I want to go home, but I need you to take me there." "Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. Another long pause. "Because you heard me. Because you saw me. Do you know how long I've been trying to be seen? The others, they never saw me." "The others? What others?" "The ones who stayed in my cabin before you. They never saw me, no matter what I did. But you're special, Morgan. You have a gift?" I didn't respond. I didn't want to be special. I didn't want a gift. "I'll be waiting," he said finally. "At the cabin. Use the key I gave you." The footsteps retreated. I heard my front door open and close. The next morning I found the wooden box with the key sitting on my kitchen counter. I know I threw it away. I know I did. I haven't gone back to the cabin, not yet, but I dream about it every night. In my dreams, I'm walking through the forest toward it, and I can see lights on inside, and someone waiting for me on the porch. And in the dreams, I feel not fear, but a strange sense of recognition, of coming home. The key sits on my nightstand now. Sometimes late at night, I swear it moves on its own, just a little, inching closer to my hand. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know who or what Daniel Holt really is. But I know that sooner or later, I'm going to take that key and drive back to Pinewood Forest. Something is pulling me there, something I don't understand. And the most terrifying part, I'm less and less sure that I want to resist it. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. Even typing it out makes my skin crawl. I still check my apartment for cameras weekly. I still look over my shoulder when I come home. I still don't feel safe. This happened about 7 months ago after I moved to Lakeside Heights. It was my first time living alone after my breakup with Jess. We'd been together 4 years, and I needed a fresh start. So I found this decent 1-bedroom in a quiet building that seemed perfect. Rent was manageable, the area was nice enough, and I was ready to begin my new chapter. Moving day was exhausting but uneventful. I was struggling with a particularly heavy box when a woman appeared in the hallway outside my door. "Need a hand with that?" she asked with a bright smile. She introduced herself as Sarah, my next-door neighbor. She was maybe in her mid-30s, with dark brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and wore a green cardigan despite it being pretty warm that day. Something I remember distinctly is how she maintained intense eye contact while we talked, barely blinking. At the time, I just thought she was being friendly, maybe a little socially awkward. "I've lived here for years," she told me, helping me position my couch. "If you need anything at all, I'm right next door in 4B. I thanked her, genuinely appreciative of the help. When she left, I felt relieved to have met a friendly neighbor right away. That feeling didn't last long. The first weird thing I noticed was about 3 days after moving in. I was heading out for my morning run around 6:30 a.m. when Sarah's door opened the second I stepped into the hallway. "Morning, Taylor," she chirped. "Early riser too, huh?" She was fully dressed, makeup done, like she'd been up for hours. I mumbled something about going for a run, and she nodded enthusiastically. "I used to run that trail by the lake too, so peaceful in the morning." I froze. I hadn't mentioned anything about running by the lake. It was a popular spot, sure, but still, something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just assumed that's where I'd go since it was the closest trail. When I returned from my run, she was in the hallway again, this time with a grocery bag. "Just got back from the store," she said, though something was off about it. The bag looked empty from where I stood. "How was your run?" The trail wasn't too muddy after yesterday's rain. It had indeed rained the previous day, and the trail had been muddy in spots. I don't remember mentioning this to her either. The next day, she knocked on my door around 7 p.m. as I was cooking dinner. "I made too much pasta," she said, holding out a container. "Thought you might want some." I thanked her but declined, saying I'd already started cooking. "Oh, making that stir-fry with the leftover chicken from yesterday?" she asked casually. My blood ran cold. I was making stir-fry with leftover chicken. How could she possibly know that? "How did you know what I'm cooking?" I asked directly. She blinked a few times, then laughed. "Just a lucky guess. Smelled like Asian spices from the hallway." I hadn't even added any spices yet. The chicken was still in the fridge. Over the next couple weeks, things got progressively weirder. Sarah would appear outside her door exactly when I was leaving for work or coming home. She always knew if I'd had a package delivered, sometimes before I did. She'd make comments about phone calls I'd had in my apartment, referencing specific things I'd discussed with friends or family. "How's your mom's new job going?" she asked one evening. I had spoken to my mom the night before about her new position, on the phone, inside my apartment, with the door closed. I started noticing other things too. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps outside my door late at night, but when I'd look through the peephole, no one was there. I'd hear soft scratching sounds at odd hours. Once, I swore I heard breathing right outside my door around 3 a.m. I called out, but nobody answered. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "Coffee sometime this week? Sarah," but the handwriting looked identical to an anonymous note I'd received a few days earlier that just said, "I see you." I had thrown that first note away, thinking it was meant for someone else or just kids in the building playing pranks. Now I wasn't so sure. The final straw came when I got home late from a work dinner. It was around 11 p.m., and I was fumbling with my keys when Sarah's door opened. "Late night?" she asked. She was wearing pajamas but looked wide awake. "How was the salmon at Riverfront Grill?" I froze. I hadn't told anyone in the building where I was going for dinner, let alone what I'd ordered. There was no way she could know this. "How did you know I had salmon?" I demanded, no longer caring about being polite. She smiled that same unwavering smile. "Oh, just a guess. It's their specialty." "I didn't tell you I was going to Riverfront," I said, my voice shaking slightly. Her expression didn't change. "Didn't you? I could have sworn you mentioned it yesterday." I hadn't spoken to her in 3 days. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises, imagining Sarah somehow watching me. I started Googling neighbor stalking and how to tell if someone is spying on you. The results were unsettling. I read accounts of people finding hidden cameras in their apartments, neighbors drilling tiny holes in walls, even using listening devices. The next morning I found another note. Dinner at my place tonight, 7 p.m. I'm making your favorite, lasagna. Sarah. Lasagna was indeed my favorite. I had mentioned this to my sister on the phone 2 nights before. I decided I needed to confront her directly. No more tiptoeing around whatever was happening. I knocked on her door around noon, figuring she'd be home since she always seemed to be. No answer, but I heard movement inside, shuffling like someone walking quietly. I knocked again, harder this time. Sarah, it's Taylor. I need to talk to you. Still no answer, but the movement stopped abruptly. I tried the handle, not really expecting it to work, but to my surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open. What I saw made my stomach drop. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, nothing in the kitchen cabinets that stood open. It looked like no one had lived there for months. The floors were dusty except for fresh footprints leading from the door to the far corner of the living room. Hands shaking, I stepped inside. Hello? My voice echoed in the empty space. The apartment had the same layout as mine, but mirrored. I walked through slowly, checking the bedroom, empty. The bathroom, empty. The kitchen, empty. Nothing indicated anyone had been living there recently. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye in the corner of the living room. A small black object, partially hidden by a loose baseboard. I moved closer and saw it was a tiny camera, about the size of a thumb drive, with a wire running behind the wall. I followed where it seemed to be pointed, directly at what would be the view of my front door from the peephole in Sarah's door. My hands trembling, I continued searching and found 3 more cameras. One aimed at my kitchen window, visible from Sarah's kitchen. One that seemed to point toward where my bedroom would be, and another near the ceiling in the hallway. That's when I noticed something else. Tiny holes drilled in the shared wall between our apartments. Dozens of them, nearly invisible unless you were looking closely. Patched and painted over, but still detectable if you knew what to look for. I backed out of the apartment, ran to mine, and called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them Sarah's empty apartment. The door was still unlocked. The cameras, the holes in the wall. They took everything seriously, took photos, asked me detailed questions about Sarah and our interactions. When they ran a check on the apartment, they found that Unit 4B had been vacant for nearly a year. The last tenant had been an elderly man who moved to a retirement community. No one named Sarah had ever been registered as living there. The building manager confirmed this when he arrived, looking confused and alarmed. He had no idea anyone had been accessing the empty unit and was horrified about the cameras. He opened his rental records. No Sarah had lived in the building during the 3 years he'd been manager. The police collected the cameras and dusted for fingerprints but found nothing useful. The cameras were generic models available online, practically untraceable. They checked my apartment too and found 2 more cameras, one in my bathroom vent and another hidden in the smoke detector in my bedroom. I moved out that same week, breaking my lease and not caring about the financial penalty. I couldn't stay there another night. I never found out who Sarah really was. The police investigation stalled with no leads. The building installed better security cameras in the hallways, but footage from the weeks prior had already been overwritten due to their 72-hour storage limit. Sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. I live in a different city now, but I check my apartment regularly for cameras. I put tape over my laptop camera and my phone camera when I'm not using them. I changed all my social media to private and use different usernames. The most terrifying part isn't even the spying. It's that I still don't know why. Was she targeting me specifically? Was it random? What did she want from me? And where did she go? I keep thinking about all those conversations, all those times she knew things she couldn't possibly know. Was she listening the entire time, watching me sleep, eat, cry? The violation feels endless, like it's still happening somehow. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep at night, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door. And I wonder if Sarah found me again. I wonder if she's standing there right now, listening, waiting for the right moment to knock and ask if I want to have coffee sometime. I've been sitting on this experience for about 3 years now, debating whether to share it. I'm not even sure where to start, but I need to get this off my chest. I worked as a tribal prosecutor on the Navajo reservation for almost a decade. The job exposed me to all sorts of things most people never see, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night in Kyle. For those unfamiliar, Kyle is a small reservation town in South Dakota. Nothing fancy, just tribal housing, schools, a courthouse where I spent most of my days, and the police department. The community is tight-knit. Everybody knows everybody's business. I had a good relationship with most of the tribal officers, especially John, who'd been with the Oglala Sioux Tribal Department of Public Safety for over 15 years. John wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He'd seen pretty much everything during his career: domestic disputes, drunk driving accidents, even a few homicides. The man was solid as a rock. It was mid-October, about 2 years ago. I was working late preparing for a big case the next day. Around 11:30 p.m., I decided to head home, but remembered I needed to drop off some paperwork at the police station for John to review before court in the morning. When I pulled into the station parking lot, the place was nearly empty. Just a couple of patrol vehicles and the dispatcher's car. I grabbed my files and headed inside. The night dispatcher, Melissa, greeted me with surprise. "What brings you here so late, counselor?" she asked. "Just dropping off some paperwork for John," I replied. "Is he around?" Her expression changed. "He just radioed in, said he's coming back to the station," sounded off. Before I could ask what she meant, the back door flew open. John burst in, his face pale. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, literally. His hands were shaking as he set his keys down. "John, you okay?" I asked. He just shook his head, walked straight to the coffee pot, and poured himself a cup, spilling some on the counter. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. John had nerves of steel. Another officer, Ben, came in from the break room. "What's going on?" John took a deep breath. "I was up on the hill doing paperwork. You know, that spot overlooking town near Highway 2. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "I was sitting there for maybe 45 minutes with my overhead light on, just catching up on reports. Then I got this feeling, like someone was watching me." The room went quiet. Even the dispatcher stopped typing. I looked in my side mirror and saw— He hesitated. "I saw a woman with long hair peeking around the back of my SUV, just staring at me in the mirror." Ben chuckled nervously. "Come on, man. Probably just a local walking by." John shook his head firmly. "No, there was no one out there when I pulled up, and the way she was just looking at me. Her hair was moving like there was wind, but the night was dead still." I felt goosebumps rising on my arms. I hit the brakes to light up the area with my brake lights, John continued. Nothing was there, but when I looked back in my mirror, she was still peeking around the corner of my vehicle. "So, what did you do?" I asked, my legal pad forgotten in my hands. "I got the hell out of there," he said bluntly, radioed in and came straight back. Ben grabbed his keys. "Let's go check it out." John's response was immediate. "No way, I'm not going back up there tonight." That's when I realized just how shaken he was. In all my years working with John, I'd never seen him refuse to investigate something. Ben tried again. "Come on, it was probably just shadows or something." "You didn't see her," John said quietly, "but I know who it was." We all waited for him to continue. "It was that girl who died in the rollover last year, the one whose family put up that memorial." I knew exactly who he meant. A young woman had died in a terrible accident when her car hit a dip in Highway 2 and rolled several times. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected from the vehicle. Her family had erected a memorial at the site, one of those roadside tributes with flowers, pictures, and a cross. They'd added a sign encouraging people to wear seatbelts. The memorial was right near where John had parked. The room fell silent again. Even Ben didn't have a smart comment for that. I left shortly after, leaving my paperwork with Melissa and telling John I'd see him in court tomorrow. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the uneasiness I felt. John wasn't one for ghost stories or superstition, despite his traditional upbringing. The next morning, I arrived at the station early to prep John for his testimony. The place was buzzing. As soon as I walked in, Ben waved me over. "You're not going to believe this," he said, leading me to the parking lot where John's patrol SUV was parked. On the back window of the vehicle were perfect handprints, exactly where someone would place their hands if they were peeking around the corner of the vehicle. The prints were clear as day, like someone with wet hands had pressed them against the glass. "This wasn't here yesterday," Ben said quietly. "The vehicles get washed every other day. This was clean yesterday afternoon." John stood a few feet away, arms crossed, refusing to approach his own vehicle. "We're going to request a different unit for me today," he said matter-of-factly when he saw me. The court proceedings that day were a blur. John gave his testimony as professionally as always, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. During a recess, I pulled him aside. "Are you really sure about what you saw last night?" I asked. He looked at me hard. "I've been an officer for 15 years. I know what I saw." Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. Other officers began reporting similar experiences near that hill. One night, Officer Martinez was parked in nearly the same spot when his radio started changing stations by itself, flipping through until it stopped on a song that had apparently been played at the young woman's funeral. Another night, Officer Wilson reported seeing a figure in a white dress walking along the highway near the memorial, only to disappear when he turned his spotlight toward it. Word spread through the community quickly. I started hearing stories from locals too. A high school student claimed she'd been driving past the memorial when her car suddenly filled with the scent of the perfume the deceased woman used to wear. An elder who lived nearby said she often saw lights hovering around the memorial site late at night. About 3 weeks after John's experience, I was in a meeting with several tribal elders discussing an upcoming case. After we finished our official business, one of the elders, Thomas, brought up the incidents on the hill. "That family meant well with their memorial," he said solemnly, "but they've anchored her spirit to that place." The other elders nodded in agreement. "In our ways," another elder named Mary explained to me, "we don't create permanent memorials at places of death. It can confuse the spirit, make them think they're supposed to stay there instead of continuing their journey. Thomas looked at me thoughtfully. Someone needs to speak with the family, explain that their memorial, while coming from love, is keeping her tied to the place of her worst pain. Since I had a good relationship with many families on the reservation, including some relatives of the deceased woman, the elders suggested I might help facilitate this conversation. I was hesitant. This wasn't exactly part of my job description as a prosecutor, but I agreed to help. The meeting with the family was difficult. They were understandably emotional, but also surprisingly receptive. The young woman's grandmother admitted she'd been having dreams about her granddaughter standing on the highway, looking confused. The mother revealed that she'd visited the memorial several times and felt an overwhelming sadness that didn't seem to fade with time. An elder who accompanied me explained gently that in our traditions the spirit needs to be free to move on, not bound to the physical world by our grief. The memorial, while well-intentioned, was like an anchor keeping her spirit tethered to the moment of her death. The family agreed to remove the memorial. The following weekend, they gathered with several elders to conduct the proper ceremonies. I was invited to attend as a witness. The family carefully took down the photos, flowers, and the cross. The elder conducted prayers and burning of sacred herbs. He explained each step of the process, how they were releasing her from this place, telling her spirit it was okay to continue its journey home. The ceremony was moving, even for someone like me who deals in facts and evidence for a living. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Highway 2, I couldn't help but feel a shift in the atmosphere. The heaviness that had seemed to hang over that stretch of road felt lifted. In the weeks that followed, the incident stopped. No more sightings, no more strange experiences in patrol vehicles. It was as if a chapter had closed, except for John. He never parked on that hill again for his paperwork. He'd find other spots, sometimes going miles out of his way to avoid that particular location. When asked about it, he'd just shake his head and change the subject. About 6 months after the ceremony, I ran into John at the gas station. It was the first time we'd really talked about that night. "You know what still bothers me?" he said quietly as we stood by the pumps. "Those handprints on my window. The lab guys said they weren't made with water or any substance they could identify. They just appeared." I didn't know what to say to that. "And her eyes," he continued, staring off toward the highway. "I didn't tell everyone this at the time, but when I saw her in my mirror, her eyes looked sad. Not angry or scary, just really, really sad, like she was lost." He finished pumping his gas and gave me a nod before getting back in his car. "Glad the family did right by her," were his parting words. I still drive that stretch of Highway 2 regularly. There's nothing there now to mark what happened. No memorial, no sign of the ceremonies that took place. Just an ordinary stretch of reservation road. But sometimes, especially when the sun is setting and the shadows grow long, I find myself glancing in my rearview mirror more often than I need to. I don't consider myself a superstitious person. My job requires evidence, facts, proof beyond reasonable doubt. But that night changed something in me. There are things in this world that don't fit neatly into police reports or legal briefs. Things that remind us that the line between worlds might be thinner than we think, especially in places marked by sudden, violent endings. To this day, I can't explain those handprints on John's vehicle. Nobody can. And sometimes, that's the most terrifying thing of all. Not the supernatural itself, but the reminder that there are things in this world that defy our need for explanation. I'm writing this down finally, after months of trying to make sense of what happened to me and my wife. I'm not even sure why I'm sharing it now, except that maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. My name is Francisco. I grew up on a Lakota reservation where my grandparents taught me about spirits, entities, and the thin veil between worlds. But I left all that behind when I moved away for college, met my wife, and settled into a comfortable suburban life about 3 hours from where I grew up. We've been living in our 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood for almost 5 years now. I've always considered myself practical. Sure, my wife and I enjoy horror movies and supernatural shows. We binged The Haunting of Hill House in a weekend and love that kind of stuff, but it's always been entertainment to us, nothing more. We were raised Catholic, but gradually stopped attending church after we got married. I'd say we became the typical Christmas and Easter Catholics, going through the motions twice a year, but not really practicing. What happened started on a Friday evening about 3 months ago. It had been raining all day, one of those steady downpours that makes you want to stay inside with a blanket. I got home from work around 6 p.m., and immediately something felt off. The house was unusually quiet. Our cats, Mochi and Luna, who normally run to the door when I come home, were nowhere to be seen. My wife was in the kitchen making dinner, but even she seemed subdued, like she was distracted by something. "Does something feel weird to you?" I asked her after I'd changed out of my work clothes. She paused, wooden spoon in hand. "I don't know. Maybe it's just the storm. I've been feeling jumpy all afternoon." We ate dinner in front of the TV, watching some Netflix show I can't even remember now. The rain kept pounding against the windows, and occasional flashes of lightning lit up the rooms. After dinner, we decided to go out on our covered balcony off the master bedroom to watch the storm. The air smelled fresh, like wet earth, and for a while we just sat there listening to the rain. That's when we heard it, the distinct sound of our front door opening and closing, followed by footsteps in the entryway downstairs. My wife gripped my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my heart suddenly pounding. We both knew what we'd heard. It wasn't the house settling or the storm. It was the specific sound of our door, which has a slight squeak, opening and closing, followed by footsteps on the tile floor. "Stay here," I whispered, but she shook her head and followed me back inside. We checked every room in the house. Nothing was missing or disturbed. The front door was locked, just as I'd left it when I came home. Our cats had tucked themselves under our bed, both appearing spooked. We tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just the TV, or the storm playing tricks on our ears. "Let's just go to bed," my wife suggested around 11 p.m. "I'm tired, and this storm is making us jumpy." I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. We went through our normal bedtime routine, brushing teeth, checking that doors were locked, turning off lights. Finally, we climbed into bed. My wife fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake, listening to the rain, which had eased to a gentle patter. I must have eventually dozed off because I suddenly jerked awake sometime later. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The house was completely silent. The rain had stopped. I wasn't sure what had woken me until I heard it again. Someone downstairs was calling to our cats. "Mochi, Luna, come here, kitties," a voice cooed, followed by a soft laugh. Ice ran through my veins. Our cats were both in the room with us. I could see Luna curled at the foot of the bed, and Mochi was in his bed by the window. I turned to wake my wife, but she was sound asleep. I shook her shoulder gently. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. The voice downstairs called to the cats again, followed by more laughter. Not friendly laughter, but something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I got out of bed as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull on my sweatpants. I remembered an old crucifix my grandmother had given me years ago that I'd stored in a box in our closet. I dug it out, not even sure why, except that something deep inside me was screaming for protection. The hallway was dark as I crept toward the stairs, crucifix clutched in my sweaty palm. I paused at the top of the staircase, straining to hear. The house was silent now. Maybe I'd dreamed it. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, my free hand on the banister to steady myself. I was about halfway down when I saw it. At the bottom of the stairs stood a figure that made my blood freeze. It looked like Christ, but not the benevolent Jesus from church paintings. This was horrifying. Naked, covered in blood that gleamed wet in the dim light from the street lamp outside our window. It wore what looked like a crown of thorns, with blood running down its face. As I watched, paralyzed, it twisted its hand into the wound on its side, digging fingers into the gash. Then it looked up at me, and I saw its eyes, black, entirely black, with no whites at all. Its mouth opened in a smile that was too wide for a human face, revealing a tongue that was unnaturally long and forked like a snake's. It laughed, the same laugh I'd heard calling to our cats, and spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your prayers cannot help you," it said, twisting its fingers deeper into its side wound. "He does not exist, but I do." I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, crucifix raised in front of me like a shield, as the thing at the bottom of the stairs began to climb toward me, leaving bloody footprints on each step. The next thing I remember is my wife shaking me awake. I was lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, the crucifix still clutched in my hand. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. "Francisco, what happened? Are you okay?" She was kneeling beside me, her face pale with worry. I sat up, wincing at the pain in my head. Had I fallen? Had it all been a nightmare? I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of blood, no footprints on the stairs. I don't know," I stammered. "I heard something down here in the night. I must have fallen." My wife helped me to my feet. "I woke up and you were gone," she said. "I called for you, but you didn't answer. Then I heard a thump and ran downstairs." She hesitated, then added, "When I got to the top of the stairs, I thought I heard your dad's voice." "My father lives 5 hours away on the reservation." "What do you mean?" "I heard him say, 'He'll be fine, don't worry.' Clear as day, like he was standing right next to me." She shivered. "And then I saw something in the kitchen. It looked like a shadow, but it was moving across the floor. When I turned on the light, it tried to look like your dad for a second, but then I don't know how to describe it. It twisted in a way a person can't move, and then it was gone." We spent the rest of the morning trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking and fallen down the stairs. Maybe my wife had been half asleep and imagined the voice and the shadow. We even checked the carbon monoxide detector, but it was working fine. For a couple of weeks, nothing else happened. We almost convinced ourselves it had been a bizarre coincidence: stress, exhaustion, and overactive imaginations. Then one night while my wife was working late, I was in bed reading when I felt something grab my ankle and bite my heel, hard. I yanked my foot up and saw teeth marks already bruising. A voice whispered from under the bed, "My son, Do not fear. Do you not want to eat my body? Do you want to drink my blood? I scrambled off the bed, heart pounding. Something wet and warm touched my foot. I looked down to see nothing there, but I could feel it, like a tongue, licking the bite on my heel. Consume my body, and I will consume yours, the voice whispered. I started to pray. The Our Father, the only prayer I could remember fully, and the thing under the bed laughed. It began reciting the prayer along with me, but twisting the words, making them obscene. I ran out of the room and didn't go back until my wife came home. I didn't tell her what happened. I was afraid she'd think I was losing my mind. But that night, we both heard scratching inside the walls, like something trying to claw its way out. The next day I called a priest. Father Mike came that evening and blessed the house with holy water. He seemed concerned but not alarmed. He'd done house blessings before for people who felt uncomfortable in their homes. He left us with a small bottle of holy water and told us to pray together each night. The blessings seemed to work for about 6 hours. That night, we found the crucifix I'd placed on our bedroom wall lying on the floor, along with a small picture of the Virgin Mary that had been on my wife's nightstand. Neither had fallen. They'd been placed carefully on the floor, side by side. Desperate, I joined an online paranormal community and described what was happening. Someone there connected me with a woman who called herself a witch doctor. She listened to my story and said something in our home was inviting this entity in. It's using religious imagery to mock your faith, she explained. It's feeding on your fear and the disconnect from your spiritual roots. As a last resort, I called my father. I hadn't told him about any of this, but something the witch doctor said about reconnecting with my spiritual roots made me think of him. Without judgment, he listened to everything I told him, then said he would send someone to help. 3 days later, a medicine man from the reservation arrived at our door. He was in his 70s, with deep lines in his face and eyes that seemed to see right through me. He didn't say much, just asked to walk through our house. The moment he entered our bedroom, he stopped. "Here," he said, pointing to a full-length mirror we'd bought on clearance a few months before all this started. "This is the problem." The mirror looked ordinary to me, just a simple wooden frame with a full-length mirror. We'd placed it in the corner of our bedroom. "This mirror has been used before," the medicine man said. "It's a portal. Something is using it to come through." My wife and I exchanged glances. We'd bought the mirror at a discount because it had been a floor model, but there was nothing unusual about it. "The glass holds memories," he continued, "and something has attached itself to this one. You need to get rid of it, not by selling it or giving it away, but by breaking it and burying the pieces." That evening, following his instructions, we took the mirror to a remote spot in the woods behind our neighborhood. The medicine man performed a ceremony, burning sage and cedar and chanting in Lakota. Then he instructed me to break the mirror with a stone. When the glass shattered, I swear I heard a scream, not from any of us, but from the mirror itself. We gathered every shard and buried them in a deep hole, which the medicine man blessed before we filled it in. Back at the house, he performed a cleansing ceremony in every room, paying special attention to the spot where the mirror had stood. He told us to keep sage burning for 7 days and to reconnect with our spiritual practices, whether Christian or Lakota. "The empty spaces in your spirit are invitations," he told me before leaving. "Fill them with something good, or something else will fill them for you." It's been 3 months since that night. We haven't experienced anything else unexplainable. We've begun attending a small Catholic church nearby. And I've also started learning more about my Lakota heritage. My wife says she feels peace in the house now that wasn't there before. But sometimes, in the darkest part of night, I still wake up suddenly, my heart racing, feeling like someone is watching me. And I can't help but check the corner where that mirror used to stand, half expecting to see a bloody figure with a crown of thorns smiling at me with too many teeth. I still don't know what it was or why it came to us. Was it because we drifted from our faith? Was it attached to that mirror all along? Or was it something more personal, something that followed me from the reservation, a spirit or entity my grandparents might have warned me about if I'd been willing to listen? All I know is that I can't explain what happened that night at the bottom of our stairs, or the bite on my heel that left a scar shaped like teeth marks, or the voice that knew exactly how to terrify me using the symbols of my childhood faith. Whatever it was, I hope it stays on the other side of that broken mirror, buried deep in the ground where we left it. I've debated for a long time whether to post this. It's been over a decade now, and I still get chills thinking about what happened back in 2011. I was 16 then, living in Toronto with my mom, but I'd visit my dad on the res in northern Ontario every other weekend. Dad was tribal police there, one of just 4 officers who patrolled our small First Nations community. That fall, October 2011, started like any other visit. Dad picked me up from the bus station Friday afternoon, but something felt off from the moment I got in his truck. He seemed distracted, kept checking his mirrors more than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked as we headed down the long road toward the reservation. "Just busy at work," he said, but I could tell there was more to it. Dad wasn't one to get rattled easily. When we pulled up to his house, my cousin Marcus was there. He worked as a police officer with my dad, and they were having some kind of discussion that stopped abruptly when I walked in. I caught just enough to hear Marcus say something about another sighting last night. I dropped my backpack and grabbed a soda from the fridge while they moved their conversation to the porch. Through the window, I could see them looking serious, gesturing toward the woods that bordered the property. Later that night, after we'd had dinner and were watching TV, Dad's radio crackled. Mrs. Blackfeather, an elder who lived alone at the edge of the reservation, was calling about someone knocking on her windows again. "Again?" I asked after he finished the call. Dad sighed, running his hand over his face. "It's the 3rd time this week. She keeps hearing knocking, but when we check, there's nobody there." "Probably just kids messing with her," I said. That's what I thought too, except there were no footprints in the mud around her house, not a single one. I felt a little chill then. Maybe she's just hearing things? She's pretty old. Dad shook his head. It's not just her anymore. 7 different households reported the same thing this week, knocking on windows at night, but nobody there when they look. The next morning, Dad got called in early. When he came back around noon, Marcus was with him, and they were both looking even more concerned than before. I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone when they came in. "Bill Patterson saw it last night," Marcus said, not realizing I was listening. "Says it was standing right outside his window, knocking and smiling at him." "Saw what?" I asked. They exchanged a look before Dad sat down across from me. "People have been seeing something on the reservation. We're trying to figure out what's going on." "What are they seeing?" Marcus leaned against the counter. "Bill described it as a shadow person, said it had yellow eyes that reflected like an animal's when his porch light hit them. Tall, thin, with pointed teeth." said it was knocking on his window, and when he went to the door, it just smiled at him and then ran into the woods faster than anything he'd ever seen. I laughed nervously. Someone's playing a prank, right? That's what we thought, Dad said. But Bill's place backs onto Sarah Blackfeather's, and he saw this thing right after she reported the knocking. Plus, Marcus added, Bill's not the type to make stuff up. He's a hunter, spent his whole life in these woods, said he's never seen anything move like that, said it darted behind a tree and just disappeared. Throughout that Saturday, I heard more stories. A woman taking out her trash saw yellow eyes watching from the trees, about 5 feet off the ground. A couple driving home saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, just smiling at them until they drove closer. Then it vanished into the tree line. People were calling it kukai, which means monster in our language. That night I was invited to a party at Jamie's cabin. Jamie was a year older than me, and I'd known him since we were kids. His family had a small hunting cabin about 2 miles into the woods, accessible by a dirt road. About 15 of us were going, mostly teenagers from the reservation who I'd grown up with before moving to the city. Dad was reluctant to let me go given everything that was happening, but he eventually agreed when he learned Jamie's older brother would be there. He made me promise to stay inside after dark and to call him if anything weird happened. The party started normal enough. We were sitting around, music playing, people drinking beer someone's older brother had bought. Eventually, the conversation turned to the shadow person sightings. My grandma says it started after those guys from the neighboring community did that unauthorized shaking tent ceremony, said Lisa, a girl I'd gone to elementary school with. The shaking tent is a sacred ritual for communicating with spirits. It's supposed to be performed only by certain people with the right training and permissions. Apparently some guys from another community had done one without permission a few weeks before. She says they opened something and didn't close it properly, Lisa continued. Let something cross over that shouldn't be here. I rolled my eyes. I'd always been more pragmatic than spiritual, even though I respected our traditions. But Jamie's older brother, Mike, nodded seriously. My uncle's on the council, and he said the elders are worried. They think whatever this thing is, it's not human, and it's not animal. It's something else. The conversation continued as darkness fell outside. Around 11 p.m., Jamie went to get more wood for the fireplace. He came back, looking pale. The rocking chair on the porch is moving, he said quietly. We all went silent. The cabin had an old wooden rocking chair on the front porch that Jamie's grandfather had made. Through the window, I could see it slowly rocking back and forth. There was no wind. Maybe someone bumped it earlier, I suggested, my mouth suddenly dry. Tyler, who was sitting nearest to the window, stood up and peered out. He jumped back immediately. There's someone sitting in it, he whispered. We all froze. Mike grabbed the baseball bat they kept by the door and flipped on the porch light. The rocking chair was empty now, but still moving. I swear to God there was something there, Tyler said, his voice shaking. It looked like a shadow, but solid somehow. It was smiling at me. Mike opened the door cautiously, bat raised. The porch was empty, but we all heard a rustling from the edge of the clearing where the cabin sat. In the beam of Mike's flashlight, for just a second, I saw what looked like 2 yellow reflective dots at the tree line, about 6 feet off the ground. Then they were gone. Everyone back inside, Mike ordered, but Damien, who'd had a few too many beers, was already charging towards the trees. Come out, you coward, he shouted. We all watched in horror as Damien reached the edge of the woods. He stopped suddenly, looking up. Then he stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, scrambling away from whatever he'd seen. When he got back to the porch, his face was ashen. "It's in the trees," he panted. "It's watching us, smiling." Mike herded everyone inside and locked the doors. We pulled all the curtains shut and huddled in the living room. Nobody wanted to admit they were scared, but nobody suggested going home either, even though it was getting late. The woods suddenly seemed much darker and deeper than before. Around midnight it started, a soft tapping on the living room window, then another at the kitchen window. Soon it sounded like knocking was coming from all around the cabin, every window, the doors, even the roof. "It's circling the house," Lisa whispered, clutching her knees to her chest. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was almost worse than the knocking. Mike tried calling the tribal police, my dad, but there was no cell service at the cabin. We decided to wait until morning to leave, but by 2 a.m., everyone was too freaked out to stay. We agreed to travel in groups to our cars. Damien had driven me there, so I left with him and 2 others. The drive back to the reservation was tense. As we pulled onto the main road, Damien finally spoke. "It was watching us from the trees," he said quietly. "But that's not the worst part. After I dropped everyone else off last night, I had to go back to lock up the cabin." My skin prickled. "What happened?" "When I went back inside to make sure all the windows were locked, it was standing in the living room." I felt my blood turn cold. "What?" "Just standing there in the dark, smiling. Its eyes were reflecting the light from my headlights through the window. When I turned on the lights, it was gone." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I don't think it's human, Nadia. Whatever it is, it's not right." Dad was waiting up when I got home. I told him everything, and he immediately called Marcus. They went out to check the cabin that night but found nothing unusual except for muddy smears on some of the windows, like something had been pressing against the glass. For the next few days, sightings continued across the reservation. Mrs. Blackfeather reported seeing it standing at the foot of her bed one night just watching her. The Petersons' dogs went crazy barking at something in their yard, but when Mr. Peterson went out with his shotgun, he just caught a glimpse of something tall and dark moving between their shed and the tree line. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sighting stopped. A week later, we heard from a community about 70 miles north that they were experiencing the same thing. Knocking, yellow eyes, a shadowy figure watching from the woods. It was like the entity was traveling northward. By the time I visited again in November, things had calmed down. People still talked about it, but the immediate fear had subsided. Dad told me that the elders had performed a cleansing ceremony for the entire community. I've been back to the reservation many times since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. Dad retired from the tribal police in 2017, and as far as I know, there haven't been any more sightings in our community. But sometimes, when I'm visiting, and the night is particularly dark, I find myself listening for that familiar knocking, wondering if the kukai is still out there, moving from community to community. And sometimes, when I look out windows facing the woods, I can't help but scan the tree line for reflective yellow eyes looking back at me. What scares me most is that I never got any real explanation. Nobody did. Whatever that shadow was, wherever it came from, it left as mysteriously as it arrived. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, when we least expect it, the knocking might start again. I've been carrying this for too long. Need to get it out there, even if no one believes me. This happened in 2012, and I still wake up smelling blood some nights. I was 22, a junior in college, and completely falling apart. My aunt, my last living relative, had died in a car accident just 3 weeks earlier. She was the only person who'd ever really given a shit about me after my parents died when I was a teenager. With her gone, I couldn't see the point anymore. I'd been depressed for years, but this pushed me over the edge. I decided I wasn't going to do it at home. Didn't want my roommate to find me. So I made a plan to go into the wilderness, somewhere beautiful, and end things there. I packed up my Remington 308 rifle, inherited from my dad, about 40 rounds of ammo, a sleeping bag, tent, some basic camping gear, and enough food for 3 days, though I only planned to need it for 1. I wrote a note, left it in my desk drawer, and drove my beat-up Honda Civic toward St. Joseph National Forest in Idaho. About an hour before reaching the forest entrance, I stopped at a Walmart to grab some water and batteries for my flashlight. While I was waiting to check out, I noticed this missing person poster on the community board near the exit. It was this girl, maybe 19, 20, with long brown hair and these really intense eyes. Her name was Emily something. The poster said she'd been missing for about 2 weeks. I remember staring at it for a minute, feeling this weird connection. Here was another life that just vanished, like mine was about to, except people were looking for her. I reached the forest around 2 p.m. The parking area was pretty much empty, just a couple of trucks way on the other side of the lot. Perfect. I wanted to get deep enough into the woods that no one would find me for a while. I hiked for about 4 hours, following a trail for the first couple miles, then deliberately going off path. I wanted to be lost. The whole time I was walking, I kept thinking about what I was going to do, rehearsing it in my head. When I found a clearing I liked, I set up my tent and then decided to do some target practice. I set up a water bottle on a log about 50 yards away and took some shots. I missed the first couple. I was rusty, but eventually hit it. After the third shot, I shouted, "Fuck you," at the top of my lungs. Just needed to get it out, you know? All that anger at the world, at everything. While I was setting up camp, I saw something. About 100 yards away, moving between trees. It was big, way bigger than a person. My first thought was bear, but it didn't move like one. It was more upright. I only saw it for a few seconds before it disappeared behind a thick grove of pines. When I looked again, it was gone. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and hadn't eaten much that day. I made a small fire and heated up some soup. The sun was starting to set, and that's when I first noticed the smell, like raw meat that's been sitting out too long. Metallic. Blood. I figured there must be a dead animal nearby, but I couldn't see anything. The smell would come and go with the breeze. Then I heard it. A voice. Distant, like it was coming through an old radio with bad reception. "Fuck, yo." It was mimicking what I'd shouted earlier, but distorted, drawn out. I stood up so fast I knocked over my soup. I grabbed my rifle and scanned the tree line. Nothing. Complete silence except for the crackling of my fire. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I spent the next hour walking around my campsite in widening circles, looking for anything unusual. Found nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I was planning to kill myself after all, not exactly in a stable mental state. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 10 p.m. Took me forever to fall asleep. Every noise made me jump, but eventually exhaustion won out. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The fire had died down to embers. That smell was back, stronger now, like I was lying in a butcher shop. And there was something else, a presence. I could feel it before I even opened my eyes. When I did look up, I saw it standing at the foot of my sleeping bag. Tall, at least 7 feet. Human-shaped but wrong somehow. Its arms were too long, ending in what looked like clawed hands. I couldn't make out its face clearly in the darkness, but I swear to God it had antlers or horns of some kind. The moonlight caught them just right. I screamed and grabbed my rifle, which I'd kept beside me, fired without even thinking. The flash temporarily blinded me, and when my vision cleared, there was nothing there, just the trees and the night. I was hyperventilating, rifle still aimed at where it had been standing. I kept the gun up for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. Eventually, I heard a voice from somewhere in the woods. "Hello? Are you all right?" We heard a shot, a normal human voice. I nearly broke down crying from relief. "Who's there?" I called back, still pointing my rifle in the general direction of the voice. "Name's Jim. Me and some friends are camping about a quarter mile from here. Heard your shot earlier today too, but figured you were hunting. That one just now sounded closer. I saw a flashlight beam cutting through the trees, and then a guy emerged into my clearing, middle-aged, bearded, wearing a flannel jacket, completely normal looking. "Jesus, kid, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Everything okay?" I lowered my rifle and tried to explain what I'd seen, but it sounded crazy even to me. Jim seemed concerned but not freaked out. "Look, why don't you come back to our camp? We've got a good fire going, some drinks, probably safer than being out here alone." I didn't need to be asked twice. I grabbed my rifle, flashlight, and phone, leaving everything else behind. I'd follow Jim back for his campfire then. Well, I could always come back and finish what I started tomorrow. Jim led me through the woods to a much larger clearing where 5 other people were sitting around a massive bonfire. They had a couple of big tents set up, coolers, camping chairs, serious campers who knew what they were doing. "Found this kid about to have a heart attack in the woods," Jim announced. "Says he saw something." The others looked at me with various degrees of interest and concern. Jim introduced them, his wife Sarah, their friends Mike and Lisa, and Mike's brother Dave with his girlfriend Tina. They all seemed nice enough, offered me a beer, which I gratefully accepted. As I was sitting down, trying to calm my nerves, I noticed someone else sitting slightly away from the group on the far side of the fire. A girl. She wasn't talking, just staring into the flames. "Who's that?" I asked Jim, nodding toward her. Jim looked confused. "Who?" "The girl. Over there." I pointed. Everyone turned to look where I was pointing. The girl looked up, and that's when I recognized her. It was the missing girl from the poster at Walmart, Emily. Except her eyes were wrong, all black, and her skin was pale, much too pale. Jim's hand moved to the pistol on his hip. "There are only 7 of us here, son. Me, Sarah, Mike, Lisa, Dave, Tina, and you." The girl stood up. She was wearing the same clothes as in the missing poster. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and she smiled, too wide, showing too many teeth. Jim pulled his gun and pointed it at her. "What the fuck are you?" he shouted. She moved so fast. 1 second she was across the fire, the next she was sprinting into the forest. Not running like a human, more like an animal on all 4s, but faster than anything I've ever seen. The smell hit us all at once. Blood, rotting meat. Everyone was on their feet, grabbing weapons, guns, knives. One guy had a hatchet. "Form a circle," Jim yelled. "Backs together." We made a defensive perimeter, all facing outward. Sarah was sobbing. Mike kept saying, "What the fuck was that?" over and over. "I've been hunting these woods for 30 years. Jim said, his voice shaking. Never seen anything like that. For hours we stood there. Sometimes we'd hear movement in the brush, branches breaking. That thing, whatever it was circling us, playing with us. Occasionally we'd catch glimpses of it moving between trees, but it was always gone before anyone could get a clear shot. Around 3 a.m. it started talking again. First, it was my voice. "Fuck yo!" Then it cycled through what I assume were imitations of the others' voices, saying things they must have said earlier. Perfect mimicry, but with that same distorted, radio-like quality. Dave couldn't take it. He grabbed a flare gun from their supplies and fired it into the trees where we'd last heard movement. The red light illuminated the forest for a few seconds, and we all saw it, standing between two pines about 50 yards away. Tall, humanoid, but wrong, with actual fucking antlers coming out of its head. In the red glow, I could see its face clearly for the first time. It looked like a human face that had been stretched over a skull that wasn't human at all. Those black eyes reflected the flare like an animal's. The flare died out, and we were back in darkness. But now we knew exactly where it was. Mike, who had a hunting rifle similar to mine, fired 3 shots in rapid succession toward where we'd seen it. We heard a horrible screeching noise, like metal grinding on metal, and then silence. "Did you hit it?" Jim whispered. We got our answer a moment later when something huge crashed through the trees on the opposite side of our circle and grabbed Dave. It happened so fast. 1 second he was standing next to me. The next, he was being dragged toward the darkness, screaming. Jim and Mike both fired their guns, and I heard a wet thud as at least one bullet found its mark. The creature dropped Dave and retreated. Dave was alive, but in shock. His arm was mangled with deep cuts that looked like they'd been made by claws. We dragged him back to the fire, and Lisa, who had some medical training, did her best to bandage him up. The thing kept circling us, occasionally making noises, sometimes animal sounds, sometimes our own voices. It was taunting us. At one point, it perfectly mimicked Dave's screams from when it had grabbed him. I don't know what came over me. Rage, maybe. Or just the fact that I'd gone out there to die anyway. When I heard it moving through the underbrush about 20 yards away, I charged. I had a bayonet attached to my rifle, another heirloom from my dad's military days, and I just ran straight at the sound with the blade extended. I collided with something solid, felt the bayonet sink into flesh. There was that screeching noise again, right in my face, and a smell so foul I gagged. Something hit me, its arm, I think, and sent me flying backward. I landed hard near the fire. The others were yelling, firing into the darkness where I'd been. I could hear the creature thrashing around, making those awful sounds, and then silence again. We stayed in our defensive circle until dawn finally broke. As soon as there was enough light to see, we packed up as fast as we could. Dave needed a hospital. We were all exhausted, terrified, running on pure adrenaline. "What about your gear?" Jim asked me as they were loading up their truck, which was parked about a mile away on a service road. I shook my head. "Leave it." I wasn't planning on needing it anymore anyway. As they were all getting into their vehicle, I stayed put. Jim looked at me questioningly. "I'm staying," I said. Jim studied my face for a moment. I think he understood what I'd originally come out there to do. "Like hell you are," he said, and then Mike and Dave's girlfriend Tina grabbed me. I struggled, but I was exhausted, and they were determined. They forced me into the truck. As we were driving away, I looked out the back window. There, at the edge of the clearing, I saw it, standing upright, watching us leave. In the daylight, it looked almost translucent, like it wasn't fully there. But I could still make out those antlers, those wrong proportions, and it was holding something in its hand. my bayonet pulled from its own flesh. I never went back to get my stuff, never reported what happened to the authorities. Who would believe us? I've looked up records of missing people in that area, trying to understand what we saw. There have been disappearances over the years, but nothing that couldn't be explained by normal wilderness dangers. I still think about that girl from the poster sometimes. Was she real? Did that thing take her? Or was it using her image somehow to lure others? I don't know. What I do know is that I didn't kill myself that day. Those strangers saved me in more ways than one. I've still got depression, still struggle, but I'm alive. Sometimes when things get really bad, I remind myself that I've seen true horror, and it's not inside me. It's out there, in those woods, wearing antlers and mimicking human voices. I never believed in monsters. Not the kind that hide under the bed, not the kind that lurk in the shadows. But that was before last summer, before that road trip to Mexico, before I saw something with my own eyes that I still can't explain. My husband, Francisco, and I had been planning the trip for months. We were going to drive from our home in San Antonio to his parents' small pueblo in Zacatecas, Mexico. Our kids, Mateo, 6, and Lucia, 4, were excited to see their abuelitos, and honestly, I was looking forward to getting away from the Texas heat for a while. The village where Francisco grew up is nestled in the mountains, so the evenings are cooler, and his mom's cooking is something I dream about. We packed up our SUV on a Friday morning, toys for the kids, snacks for the road, all our luggage, and emergency supplies. Francisco was raised to be prepared for anything, especially on Mexican roads. I remember rolling my eyes as he double-checked the spare tire and packed extra water. If only I'd known how inadequate all that preparation would be. The drive through Texas was uneventful. The kids watched movies on their tablets. Francisco and I listened to music, and we made good time. We crossed the border at Laredo around noon, and that's when things started to feel different. Francisco grew quieter, more focused on the road. When I asked if everything was okay, he just nodded and said we needed to make it to his parents' place before nightfall. "It's just safer to drive during the day," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The highways in Mexico can be dangerous after dark." I assumed he meant drug cartels or bandits, the normal concerns when traveling in certain parts of Mexico. I had no idea what he was really worried about. As we got deeper into Mexico, the landscape changed. The flat scrubland gave way to rolling hills, and eventually the foothills of the Sierra Madre. The roads narrowed, and the towns we passed through became smaller and more rustic. I could feel Francisco relaxing slightly as we got closer to his hometown, but then we hit a roadblock. A section of the main highway had collapsed from recent rains, and there was a detour sign pointing to a dirt road that veered off into the hills. That's when I noticed a change in Francisco. His knuckles went white on the steering wheel, and he muttered something under his breath in Spanish. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "This detour, it takes us through an area I don't like." The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Francisco stared at the detour sign for a long moment, then checked his watch. It was about 6 p.m. "We don't have a choice," he finally said. "We can't go back, and we can't stay here. We need to get to my parents' house before dark." He turned onto the dirt road, and I felt the car bounce over the uneven terrain. The kids giggled in the back, thinking it was fun, but I could see the tension in Francisco's jaw. "Papi, why are you driving so fast?" Mateo asked from the back seat. I hadn't even noticed, but Francisco had pressed his foot down on the accelerator. The SUV was now speeding along the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind us. "We need to hurry, mijo," Francisco replied, checking the rearview mirror repeatedly. "We need to get to Abuelita's house before they come out." "Before who comes out?" I asked, a chill running down my spine despite the warm evening. Francisco glanced at me, then back at the road. "It's nothing, just stories my grandmother used to tell me." But I could tell it wasn't nothing, not to him. "What stories, Papi?" Lucia chimed in from the back seat. Francisco sighed. "Just old Pueblo stories, mi vida, about brujos and naguales." "What are those?" Mateo asked. "Brujos are witches," Francisco explained, his voice tight. "And naguales are people who can turn into animals, bad animals. My grandmother said they come out at night to hunt in these hills." I rolled my eyes, trying to keep things light for the kids. "Francisco, don't scare them with those old superstitions." But he didn't smile back. "These aren't just stories, Viviana. Not in this region. My cousin swore he saw one when we were teenagers. And my grandfather, he had an encounter too." The road was getting rougher, winding through increasingly dense scrub and cactus. The sun was sinking faster now, the sky turning deep orange and purple. We had maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. Francisco kept checking his watch and pressing harder on the gas pedal. The SUV bounced violently over the rutted road, and I had to brace myself against the dashboard. "Francisco, slow down. You're going to wreck the—" That's when it happened. Something darted out in front of the car. It was so fast I barely saw it, just a dark shape about the size of a large dog. There was a sickening thud, and Francisco slammed on the brakes. The SUV fishtailed on the dirt road before coming to a stop in a cloud of dust. "Dios mío," Francisco whispered, his face pale in the fading light. "Did we hit a dog?" I asked, turning to check on the kids. They looked scared but unhurt. "I don't know." Francisco grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. "Stay in the car, all of you. Lock the doors behind me." "Francisco, wait." But he was already out of the car. I quickly climbed into the driver's seat and locked all the doors as he'd instructed. Through the windshield, I could see him walking back along the road, the beam of his flashlight bouncing in the growing darkness. He disappeared around a bend, and for several long minutes all we could hear was the tick of the cooling engine and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. The kids were quiet in the back seat, sensing that something was wrong. When Francisco reappeared, he was running. Even in the dim light, I could see that his face was ashen, drained of all color. He reached the car and yanked on the door handle. Unlock it now," he shouted. I hit the button and he practically fell into the passenger seat. "Drive," he yelled. "Drive now, Viviana." "What was it? What did we hit?" I asked, putting the car in gear. "It doesn't matter. Just drive, fast. We need to get out of here." I pressed on the gas and the SUV lurched forward. Francisco kept looking back through the rear window. "What did you see back there?" I demanded. His breathing was ragged. "I don't want to scare the kids." "Tell me," I insisted, keeping my voice low. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "It wasn't an animal. Not exactly. It was small, like a child, but wrong. Its face was wrong, and its eyes—" He shuddered. "They were red, glowing red." A chill ran through me. "Francisco, that's not possible." "I know what I saw," he said firmly, "and we need to get out of here now. Before—" That's when we heard it. A shriek that cut through the night, not quite human, not quite animal. It raised the hair on the back of my neck and made my blood run cold. "What was that?" Mateo whimpered from the back seat. Nothing, mijo, Francisco said, but his voice trembled. Just a bird or something. The shriek came again, closer this time. That's no bird, I whispered. Drive faster, Francisco urged. I pressed down harder on the gas, but the rough road made it dangerous to go too fast. The headlights bounced wildly, illuminating the narrow dirt track and the dense brush on either side. The shrieking continued, getting closer. And then I saw movement out of my window. Something was running alongside the car. At first, I thought it was a bull. We were in ranch country after all. But as I caught glimpses of it in the fading light, I realized it was something else entirely. It was massive, black as midnight, with the general shape of a bull, but wrong. Its proportions were off, its movements too fluid for something so large, and its face. God, its face. Francisco, I whispered, unable to take my eyes off the thing. Do you see that? He followed my gaze and cursed in Spanish. Don't look at it, just drive. But I couldn't look away. As the creature paced our car, it turned its head toward me. Its eyes were enormous, glowing red like hot coals in the darkness. Its face was distorted, almost human but stretched and twisted into something demonic. Thick saliva dripped from its mouth as it let out another piercing shriek. The kids started crying in the back seat. "Cover your eyes, niños!" Francisco shouted. Then, to my shock, he rolled down his window. "Francisco, what are you doing?" He ignored me and shouted something in Spanish, not modern Spanish, but something older, words I didn't recognize. The creature responded with a roar that shook the car, and then it veered toward us. The impact came without warning, a massive blow to the driver's side that sent our SUV skidding across the dirt road. I fought with the steering wheel, trying to keep us from rolling over. "Keep going," Francisco shouted. The creature struck again, this time hitting the rear quarter panel. The kids screamed as our vehicle fishtailed wildly. I don't know how many times it rammed us. 3? 4? Each impact was harder than the last, the creature seeming to grow stronger with each attack. On the final hit, I lost control completely. The SUV spun, tilted, and then we were rolling. I remember the disorientation, the kids' screams, the crunch of metal and breaking glass. When the vehicle finally came to rest on its side, everything went quiet for a moment. My head had struck the window, and I felt warm blood trickling down my face. "Francisco," I called out, my voice weak. "Kids?" I could hear Lucia crying softly, and Mateo saying something I couldn't make out. Francisco was slumped against his seatbelt, unconscious but breathing. That's when I saw it again, that face at my window. The creature was there, staring in at me with those terrible red eyes. Its distorted features seemed to shift into what I can only describe as a smile. A knowing, malevolent smile that said it had us exactly where it wanted us. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The world started to fade around me, darkness creeping in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I remember is that face, those eyes, and the absolute certainty that we were going to die. I woke up to unfamiliar voices speaking rapid Spanish. When I opened my eyes, I saw flashlights, concerned faces, men helping Francisco out of the wreckage. Someone was carefully extracting the kids from their car seats. "The children?" I managed to ask as hands reached in to help me. "Están bien, señora," a man assured me. "They're okay." I later learned that Francisco's family had grown worried when we didn't arrive. Knowing we would be taking the detour, his father had gathered some men from the village to search for us. They found us about 2 miles from where the dirt road rejoined the main highway. 2 miles from safety. At his parents' home, after the local doctor had checked us all out, miraculously, none of us had serious injuries. Francisco's father pulled me aside while my husband was putting the kids to bed. Francisco told me what happened, he said gravely. What you saw on the road. I nodded, still too shaken to speak about it. It was a nagual, he continued. A shapeshifter. They're known in this region. What you hit first, it was probably a younger one, and the larger one that attacked you was seeking revenge, I finished, remembering the rage in those red eyes. Francisco's father nodded. They are dangerous, especially to outsiders. The words Francisco shouted, they were protective phrases his grandmother taught him. They probably saved your lives. I wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, as the product of fear and concussion and the trauma of the accident, but I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen. We stayed in the village for a week, recovering and visiting with family. Everyone was kind, but I noticed how they looked at us, with pity and something else. Fear, maybe, as if we were marked somehow. On our last day there, I was in the village square with Lucia, buying some fruit from a local vendor. That's when I saw them, an old man walking slowly across the plaza, holding the hand of a young boy who had a cast on his leg. I wouldn't have paid them any attention except for one thing. When they passed by us, they both turned to look directly at me. The boy's face was innocent enough, but his eyes, they were the same sinister red I'd seen on that creature in the darkness. The old man smiled, that same knowing smile, and then they were gone, disappearing into the crowd. We left that afternoon. Francisco didn't argue when I insisted we take the long way around, avoiding the detour completely, even though it added hours to our journey. We drove in daylight, stopping well before sunset at a hotel in a larger city. It's been months now, and we haven't spoken much about what happened. The kids have mostly forgotten, or at least they don't talk about it. But Francisco and I know. Something hunted us on that road, something that wasn't supposed to exist outside of old folk tales. And sometimes when I'm driving at dusk and catch a movement in my peripheral vision, I feel that same primal fear wash over me. I check the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back at me. I don't know what attacked us that night. I don't know if it was truly a nagual or something else entirely. But I know that it was real. And I know that somewhere in those hills, it's still there, waiting for the next travelers who take that detour after dark. I don't believe in monsters. Not anymore. Now I know they exist. I've been in the unusual infestation removal business for over 20 years now. Started with typical stuff, raccoons in attics, squirrels in walls, bats in chimneys. As my reputation grew, I started getting calls for the weirder jobs most exterminators wouldn't touch. Haunted objects, shadow people, even a Sasquatch once. Turns out they're mostly peaceful, just territorial and scared of humans. But there's one thing I refuse to handle anymore. One creature I won't go near unless it's to evacuate potential victims. The hide behind. I'm only writing this because I need to process what happened last week and because people need to know what to look for. Maybe someone will read this and get out in time. Last Monday I got a call from an elderly guy named Tim who lived about 80 miles north of my place in Michigan. Claimed he had a demon in his house. I've dealt with actual demonic entities before. Rare, but they exist. So I drove out to his place the next morning. His property was fairly isolated, a small farmhouse on about 10 acres, mostly surrounded by dense woods. Nearest neighbor was probably half a mile away. Tim was waiting on his porch when I pulled up. Looked to be in his 70s, thin but wiry strong like old farmers get. He had this jittery energy about him, kept glancing around while we talked. Classic signs of someone who's been terrorized in their own home. "Thanks for coming out," he said as I grabbed my equipment bag from the truck. Thought I was going crazy until it showed itself clear as day. I asked him to walk me through what he'd been experiencing. Always start with the timeline. When did it begin? How did it progress? "Started about 3 weeks ago," Tim said. "Just feeling like something was watching me. You know that feeling when the hairs on your neck stand up? Like that, but all damn day." I nodded. Could be anything from a stalker to a spirit attachment at that point. Then I started hearing scratching in the walls at night. Figured it was mice, set some traps, caught nothing. Then last week, I was washing dishes, looked up at my back door, and there was a damn bear staring through the screen. That caught my attention. Bears aren't uncommon up here, but they rarely approach houses so boldly. I grabbed my shotgun, but by the time I got back to the door, it was gone. No tracks in the mud outside, nothing. 2 days later, I'm taking trash out and see a woman standing by my garage, pale as a ghost, wearing some kind of old-fashioned dress. I called out to her, and she just slipped around the corner. When I went to look, nobody was there. Garage door was still locked from the inside. My stomach dropped. I recognized patterns in this work, and this one was setting off major alarm bells. "Tim," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "has anything gone missing? Small objects, food items? Any dead animals on your property?" He looked surprised. "Yeah, actually. Can't find my spare house key, and my bird feeder keeps getting emptied overnight. Found a dead raccoon by the shed yesterday, all torn up." I took a deep breath. "When you feel like you're being watched, do you ever look behind you?" "All the time," he said. "Never see anything, though." That confirmed it. I've only encountered 3 hide-behinds in my career. First one was in Oregon, working with a local tribe's shaman who knew what we were dealing with. Second was in northern Minnesota, and I barely got the family out in time. Third one killed 2 people before I could identify what it was. I set down my bag and looked Tim straight in the eyes. "What you have isn't a demon. It's something called a hide-behind. Indigenous people have different names for them. Loggers in the Northwest called them that because they're constantly ducking behind objects, trees, furniture, doorways, always staying just out of clear sight." Tim frowned. "What exactly are they?" "Nobody knows for certain. Some kind of shapeshifter. They can appear as anything that might lure you closer. Animals, people, even children. The bear, the woman, those were it testing you, figuring out what might work." I explained what I knew. Hide-behinds start by establishing territory, usually in remote areas with 1 or 2 human occupants. They create a sense of persistent paranoia, making their victims constantly check their surroundings. But there's a trick to it. They manipulate your perception somehow. You'll look everywhere except directly behind you, which is where they position themselves. "So how do we kill it?" Tim asked, jaw set with determination. "We don't. You can't. I've never heard of anyone successfully killing or even injuring a hide-behind. They're not fully physical in the way we understand it." "There must be a way to get rid of it," he insisted. I shook my head. "There's only one solution. You need to leave. Abandon the property. Don't come back." He laughed like I'd just told a bad joke. "Son, I've lived here for 43 years. Built this place with my own hands after Vietnam. I'm not leaving because of some monster." I spent the next hour trying to convince him, explaining everything I knew about hide-behinds, how they feed on fear before they feed on flesh, how once they've chosen a territory, they don't leave until there's nothing left to hunt, how they're patient, They'll wait weeks, months sometimes, until their victim lets their guard down. Tim, listen to me. The fact that it's shown itself to you twice means it's getting ready to move. It's not going to keep playing hide and seek forever. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a shotgun. This stopped 2 home invaders back in '98. It'll stop whatever this thing is too. I was losing patience. You're not hearing me. Weapons don't work. You can empty that shotgun into it and it won't make a difference. These things aren't natural. They don't follow natural laws. Everything dies, he said stubbornly. I gave him my card with my cell number. At least call me if things get worse, day or night, and watch for these warning signs. If you start finding small personal items in places you didn't leave them. If you hear your name being called when no one's there. And most importantly, if you suddenly can't find your pets or if wild animals stop coming around your property. Those mean it's getting ready to attack. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously enough. Some people just won't be saved. I did one walkthrough of his house, confirmed there were no other entities present, and left. Felt sick to my stomach the whole drive home. Should have tried harder to convince him. Should have called in some backup maybe. 2 days later, my phone rang at 3:17 a.m. It was Tim. I knew immediately from the way he was breathing. Quick, shallow pants. It's here, he whispered, in the house. Tim, get out now. Don't grab anything. Just go to your truck and drive away. Can't, he said. It's blocking the door. Keeps moving. I see it from the corner of my eye, but when I turn, his voice broke off. Where are you in the house? Kitchen. Got my shotgun. Fired at it twice already, but it's still here. Listen to me. It's playing with you. They do this. They create a game. They make you think you can catch them, but you can't. Is there another exit? A window you can climb out of? He didn't respond for several seconds. Then, something's wrong with my eyes. I can't look behind me. Physically can't turn my head that way. My blood went cold. It was the final stage. The hide behind was directly behind him, exerting some kind of influence to prevent him from seeing it. Tim, run straight for the nearest window and dive through it. Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just run and crash through it, even if you get cut up. I heard him breathing harder, like he was psyching himself up. Okay, I'm going to... The phone erupted with a shotgun blast, followed by a sound I'll never forget. A wet, gurgling scream that didn't sound entirely human. Then nothing but heavy breathing on the line. Not Tim's breathing. Tim, I called out. Something that wasn't Tim made a soft clicking sound. Then the call ended. I was in my truck within 5 minutes. Made the 80-mile drive in record time. Pulled up to Tim's place just as dawn was breaking. The house looked normal from outside. No signs of struggle. His truck was still parked in the same spot. I grabbed my emergency kit, salt, sage, iron implements, holy water, and a flare gun loaded with a special round that burns at 3,000 degrees. Not that any of it would work against a hide behind, but old habits die hard. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, listening for any movement. Nothing. The house was eerily silent. No clock ticking, no refrigerator humming, like the place was holding its breath. I found what was left of Tim in the kitchen. I won't describe it in detail. Just know that hide-behinds don't kill cleanly, and they don't consume everything at once. They like to preserve parts. Keep them as lures for the next victim. I checked the rest of the house methodically, room by room. Found pieces of Tim in all of them. The hide-behind had scattered him throughout the house, arranging parts in ways that suggest it has some kind of twisted artistic sense. What it didn't know was that I had no intention of removing it or fighting it. I knew better. I went back to my truck, grabbed the 5-gallon gas can I keep for emergencies, and started at the back of the house. Poured a trail through every room, making sure to soak the baseboards thoroughly. Ended at the front porch. I stood there for a moment, taking one last look at the property. That's when I saw it, at the edge of the woods about 50 yards away. A small boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing overalls and a red t-shirt, just standing there, watching me. Our eyes met and he smiled, too wide, showing too many teeth. Then he casually stepped behind a tree that couldn't possibly have hidden his whole body. It was barely 6 inches wide. I lit the gasoline trail and didn't look back until I was in my truck with the engine running. The fire caught quickly. By the time I reached the end of the long driveway, flames were already visible through most of the windows. I called 911 once I was a few miles away, reported the fire anonymously. Felt bad about Tim's house, but it was necessary. No one else could move in there. That was a week ago. I haven't slept much since. Keep feeling like I'm being watched, but that's probably just paranoia. Hide-behinds don't follow people away from their territory. They claim a place, not a person. At least, that's what I've always believed. If you suspect a hide-behind in your area, do not try to document it. Do not try to catch it on camera. Do not try to fight it. Just leave, immediately. Burn the place if you can do so safely. It's the only way. And if you ever get that feeling, that persistent nagging feeling that something is watching you, but you can never quite catch sight of it, call someone you love. Tell them where you are, because the hide-behind is standing directly behind you right now, waiting for you to forget it's there. I hope this helps someone. I doubt Tim was its first victim in that area, and if the house survived the fire, he won't be the last. I just need to shake this feeling that something followed me home. That's not possible. It can't be. But I keep finding my car keys in places I didn't leave them. And twice now, I've thought I heard someone call my name in an empty room. And just now, as I'm typing this, I realized I haven't been able to turn my head to look behind me for the past 5 minutes.